You don't remember me, do you? Source's voice cut through the diner's chatter as she set the coffee cup down, her hands trembling. The billionaire CEO froze because he remembered everything. The promises, the night he chose money over her, the letters she sent that he never answered. And now she was standing here, 25 years later, serving him coffee while wearing a name tag that should have read Dr. McMahon if he hadn't destroyed her dreams. What he did next would make headlines around the world. But first, he had to survive the reckoning in her eyes. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's continue.
The 43rd floor of the Columbia Center in Seattle held the kind of silence that money bought. Jacob Alexander stood before windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, watching the morning fog roll across Elliott Bay. His reflection stared back, sharp jawlines softened by exhaustion, gray threading through black hair that once fell carelessly across his forehead. At 43, he commanded a tech empire worth $12 billion. At 43, he ate breakfast alone every morning. His phone buzzed against the glass desk. "Mr. Alexander, the quarterly reports are ready for your review." "Send them up, Patricia." Jacob's voice carried the weight of a man who had learned that every word held consequences. He moved to his desk, past walls lined with awards that meant nothing and photos with politicians who called him friend but didn't know his middle name. The reports painted the picture his investors craved. Alexander Technologies had acquired 17 companies in the past year alone. Each acquisition brought profits, market share, and the hollow satisfaction of winning games that no longer mattered to him. Jacob opened the top drawer of his desk. Buried beneath legal documents and business cards lay a single photograph, Warren High School's class of 1999 yearbook picture. His finger traced the face of a girl with bright eyes and a smile that once made him believe in forever. Saoirse McMahon, valedictorian, pre-med track. The girl who taught him that intelligence was the most beautiful thing a person could possess. "Where are you now?" The words escaped before he could stop them. He'd hired 3 different private investigators over the years. Each had failed to find her. It was as if she'd vanished the day he left for Stanford, taking his ability to love anyone else with her. Patricia knocked and entered with the reports. "Sir, there's also this." She handed him a leather portfolio. "The Hartwell Industries acquisition requires your personal oversight. They want to meet tomorrow in Bakersfield." Bakersfield. Jacob frowned. "Why not bring them here?" "They're old school, sir. Family business for 3 generations. They insist on meeting on their home turf." Patricia's tone suggested she found this as peculiar as he did. "The meeting is set for 2 p.m. at a local establishment called Mel's Diner. Apparently, it's where they conduct all their major business." Jacob stared at the portfolio. In 20 years of acquisitions, he'd never been asked to meet at a diner. But Hartwell Industries manufactured the circuit boards that powered half his products. If they wanted diner coffee and vinyl booths, he'd give them diner coffee and vinyl booths. "Book the jet. We leave at dawn." 300 miles south, Saoirse McMahon tied her apron strings and checked the coffee machines at Mel's Diner. 5:30 a.m. came early, but she'd been waking before sunrise for so long that her body no longer remembered how to sleep past dawn. The diner held the scent of bacon grease and possibility, the same smell that had greeted her when she'd started working here 15 years ago. Back then, she'd told herself it was temporary, a way to pay for her mother's medical bills while she figured out how to get back to school. Temporary had become permanent the way water carved canyons, slowly, then all at once. Morning, sunshine. Mel Hartwell emerged from the kitchen, flour dusting his apron. He'd inherited the diner from his father and his father before him. 3 generations of Hartwells had served coffee and dreams in equal measure. Morning, Mel. The usual crowd today, plus some fancy business meeting this afternoon. My nephew's finally selling the circuit board company. Can you believe it? 30 years I've been telling him to expand, and now some tech billionaire wants to buy him out. Saoirse filled the sugar dispensers with practiced efficiency. Good for him. Sometimes you have to know when to let go. Mel studied her face. You ever think about letting go, Saoirse? You're too smart to spend your whole life in this place. She'd heard variations of this conversation for years. The customers who recognized her intelligence, the regulars who knew she'd once been destined for medical school, the well-meaning friends who couldn't understand why she stayed. None of them understood that staying wasn't about giving up. It was about holding on. To her mother, who needed constant care. To her daughter, who deserved stability. To the pieces of herself that remained unbroken. This place isn't a prison, Mel. It's home. The bell above the door chimed, and Saoirse looked up to see Tommy Reeves shuffling in. 72 years old, diabetic, stubborn as a mule about taking his medication. He ordered the same thing every morning: coffee, black, and a lecture about how doctors didn't know anything. The usual, Tommy. You know it, girl. And none of that decaf nonsense. If I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die caffeinated. Saoirse poured his coffee and slid a sugar-free muffin onto his plate. Your granddaughter called yesterday. She's worried about your blood sugar. My granddaughter worries about everything. That's what happens when you go to college. You learn to worry about things that don't matter. The irony wasn't lost on her. Once, she'd been the girl who was supposed to go to college, supposed to worry about important things. Now she worried about whether Tommy took his insulin and whether her mother remembered to eat lunch. The morning rush began at 7. Construction workers ordered coffee to go, their hands already stained with the day's labor. Office workers grabbed breakfast sandwiches, scrolling through phones that cost more than Saoirse made in a month. Mothers with tired eyes and crying babies needed caffeine and patience in equal measure. Saoirse moved through it all with quiet grace. She remembered names, asked about sick relatives, celebrated small victories. Mrs. Patterson's arthritis was better. The Henderson son had made the high school football team. Life happened in the spaces between orders, in the moments when people needed to be seen. Order up. Mel called from the kitchen. Saoirse carried plates of eggs and bacon to table 6, where 2 truck drivers debated the merits of different routes through the mountains. She'd learned to listen without hearing, to be present without being invasive. The skill had taken years to develop, but it served her well in a world where everyone needed someone to talk to. At her break, she stepped outside into the October morning. The sun painted the San Joaquin Valley in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere out there, in cities she'd never see and offices she'd never enter, people were making decisions that would shape the world. Once, she'd thought she'd be one of them. Her phone buzzed with a text from her daughter. Mom, got into the honors program. Call you tonight. Love you. Saoirse smiled, the first real smile of the day. Camila was 18, brilliant, and bound for UC Berkeley in the fall. Everything Saoirse had sacrificed had been for this moment, to give her daughter the chances she'd never had. She tucked the phone away and returned to the diner. The afternoon shift was always quieter, filled with coffee refills and quiet conversations. Today felt different, though. There was an energy in the air, a sense that something was about to change. Mel approached her with unusual nervousness. Saoirse, about that meeting this afternoon. The buyer's supposed to be some big shot from Seattle. Jacob Alexander. Ever heard of him? The coffee pot slipped from her hands, shattering against the floor in an explosion of glass and caffeine. Time stopped. The name hit her like a physical blow, 25 years of carefully constructed walls crumbling in an instant. I'm sorry. Let me clean this up. But as she knelt among the broken pieces, Saoirse McMahon knew that some things, once shattered, could never be put back together the same way again. The private jet descended through California's Central Valley at 1:47 p.m., 13 minutes ahead of schedule. Jacob stared through the oval window at acres of farmland stretching toward distant mountains, a landscape that bore no resemblance to the concrete and glass world he'd built around himself. His stomach twisted with an unfamiliar nervousness that had nothing to do with the Hartwell acquisition. "Sir, the car is waiting on the tarmac," his assistant Marcus informed him, checking his tablet. "Mel's Diner is approximately 12 minutes from the airport. Quite the unique venue for a business meeting." Jacob straightened his navy suit jacket and grabbed his briefcase. Sometimes the most important deals happen in unexpected places. The words felt prophetic as they left his lips, though he couldn't explain why. The rental car wound through Bakersfield streets, past strip malls and fast food chains that could have belonged to any American city. But as they approached the older part of town, the buildings grew smaller, more personal. Hand-painted signs replaced corporate logos. This was the kind of place where people knew their neighbors' names and business was conducted with handshakes instead of legal teams. Mel's Diner sat on the corner of Chester Avenue and 19th Street like a time capsule from 1962. Red vinyl booths lined the windows, and a neon sign buzzed with the promise of home-style cooking 24/7. Jacob's chest tightened as they pulled into the parking lot. Something about this place felt familiar in a way that defied logic. He pushed through the glass door, and a bell announced his arrival with a cheerful chime. The scent hit him first: coffee, bacon, and something sweeter that reminded him of... No, it couldn't be. The diner hummed with afternoon conversations. Two elderly men debated baseball statistics over pie and coffee. A mother cut pancakes for twin toddlers who wore more syrup than they consumed. In a corner booth, a teenager hunched over homework, earbuds blocking out the world. "You must be Mr. Alexander." Jacob turned to see Mel Hartwell approaching, a sturdy man in his 60s with calloused hands and genuine smile lines. "Mel Hartwell, thanks for making the drive down here. I know it's not what you're used to, but this place has been in my family for 40 years. Seemed fitting to discuss the future here." "Of course. I appreciate the authenticity." Mel led him toward a booth in the back corner. "Can I get you some coffee while we wait for my nephew? Best in the valley, I promise you that. Please." Jacob slid into the booth, his back to the wall out of habit. From here, he could survey the entire diner, catalog the exits, assess the situation. 20 years of high-stakes business had taught him to control his environment. But then she emerged from the kitchen. Time didn't slow. It stopped completely. She carried a coffee pot in one hand and wore a uniform the color of sunshine, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. 25 years had refined her features without hardening them, added wisdom to her eyes without dimming their intelligence. She moved with the same quiet grace he remembered, but there was something new in her bearing, strength forged by surviving whatever life had thrown at her since he'd last seen her face. Saoirse McMahon, the girl who'd held his heart, the woman he'd never stopped loving. Their eyes met across the diner, and the coffee pot trembled in her hands. For a heartbeat, she was 18 again, wearing his Letterman jacket and laughing at something he'd whispered in her ear. Then reality crashed back, and she was a stranger in a uniform, staring at the man who'd left her behind. Jacob's carefully constructed world tilted on its axis. "Sir." Mel's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Everything all right?" Jacob forced himself to breathe, to think, to function like the businessman he'd trained himself to be. But his hands shook as he reached for his water glass. "Fine. I'm fine." Saoirse approached their table with professional composure, but Jacob caught the slight hitch in her step, the way she gripped the coffee pot a little too tightly. When she spoke, her voice carried the same melodic quality that had once whispered his name in the darkness of teenage summers. "Good afternoon. Can I get you gentlemen some coffee?" The question was directed at both of them, but her eyes focused somewhere past Jacob's shoulder, as if looking directly at him might cause her physical pain. "Coffee would be great," Jacob managed, his voice rougher than intended. She poured slowly, carefully, the liquid dark as the secrets they'd both been carrying. When she leaned forward to fill his cup, he caught a hint of vanilla perfume, the same scent she'd worn to prom. The memory hit him like a physical blow, her hand in his, promises made under starlight, the way she'd looked at him like he hung the moon. Will there be anything else? The professional mask never slipped, but Jacob saw the teenager behind it, the girl who'd planned to change the world. Actually, Mel interjected, oblivious to the charged atmosphere. This is Saoirse McMahon, our finest waitress. Been with us 15 years. Saoirse, meet Jacob Alexander, the gentleman who's interested in buying out my nephew's business. The formal introduction felt absurd. They'd once known every freckle on each other's skin, every dream in each other's hearts. Now they were strangers making polite conversation in a diner that smelled like lost possibilities. Nice to meet you, Mr. Alexander. Her voice was steady, but Jacob caught the slight tremor underneath. I'll let you gentlemen discuss your business. She turned to leave, and panic flared in Jacob's chest. 25 years of wondering, of regret, of building an empire to fill the void she'd left behind, and now she was walking away again. Saoirse. Her name escaped before he could stop it. She paused, her shoulders tensing. Yes. 1,000 questions crowded his throat. Where have you been? Are you happy? Do you ever think about us? Did you know I never stopped looking for you? Thank you for the coffee. The words were inadequate, pathetic even. But they were all he could manage with Mel watching and the weight of 2.5 decades pressing down on them both. She nodded once and walked away, leaving Jacob staring after her like a man who'd just seen a ghost. Fine woman, Mel commented, settling back into his seat. Smart as a whip. Used to be pre-med, you know. Life threw her some curveballs, but she landed on her feet. Always does. Pre-med. Jacob's heart clenched. She'd gotten into Stanford's pre-med program the same year he'd started computer science. They'd planned to go together, to build a life in California while pursuing their dreams. But his father's company had needed him, and Stanford had offered him opportunities he couldn't refuse. He'd convinced himself he was being practical, responsible. He'd convinced himself she'd understand. Mr. Alexander? You seem distracted. Jacob forced his attention back to Mel. Sorry. It's been a long day. But across the diner, he watched Saoirse refill coffee cups and take orders, her movements economical and graceful. Every few minutes, their eyes would meet by accident, and the air between them would crackle with unfinished conversations and unhealed wounds. At 2:15, Mel's nephew arrived, Tommy Hartwell Jr., a nervous man in his 50s who apologized profusely for being late. They spent the next hour discussing circuit board manufacturing, profit margins, and integration strategies. Jacob participated in the conversation, asked the right questions, made the appropriate responses. But part of his consciousness remained focused on the woman who moved through the diner like she owned every inch of it. During a lull in the conversation, she approached their table again. More coffee. This time, Jacob looked directly at her. Really looked. He saw the lines around her eyes that spoke of laughter and worry in equal measure. The wedding ring that wasn't there, leaving only a pale band of skin on her finger. The way she carried herself with dignity despite wearing a uniform that probably cost less than his tie. Please. As she leaned forward to pour, their fingers brushed against the handle of his cup. The contact lasted less than a second, but electricity shot up Jacob's arm like he'd been struck by lightning. Saoirse's hand jerked, and coffee splashed onto the table. I'm so sorry. She grabbed napkins from her apron, her professional composure finally cracking. Let me clean that up. It's fine. Jacob's voice was gentler now, more like the boy she'd once loved. Really? For a moment, they were the only two people in the diner. The business meeting, the other customers, the weight of their separate lives all faded away. There was only this, two people who'd once promised each other forever, now separated by 25 years and a coffee stain on a Formica table. Saoirse. Jacob began, not knowing what he wanted to say. But the spell broke as Mel cleared his throat, and the real world crashed back in. She finished cleaning the spill with quick, efficient movements, then disappeared back into the kitchen without another word. The business meeting concluded at 4 o'clock with handshakes and promises to have contracts drawn up within the week. Jacob went through the motions, but his mind remained focused on the woman who'd vanished into the back of the diner like smoke. As the Hartwells prepared to leave, Jacob made a decision that surprised even him. "Actually, I think I'll stay for a while. I'd like to get a feel for the local area." Mel looked puzzled but pleased. "Of course. Saoirse will take good care of you. Best service in the valley." After they left, the diner grew quiet. The afternoon crowd had thinned, leaving only a few scattered customers and the weight of unspoken history. Jacob sat in the booth, nursing his third cup of coffee and watching Saoirse work. She moved efficiently between tables, but he noticed she avoided looking in his direction. The careful distance she maintained spoke volumes about the wounds that had never properly healed. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, she approached his table one more time. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Alexander?" The formal address stung. Once she'd called him Jake, or sometimes just mine, when they were alone in his car beneath the California stars. "Actually, yes." Jacob met her eyes, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I was wondering if you might have a minute to talk." Saoirse glanced around the diner, checking for other customers who might need her attention. When she looked back at him, her expression was carefully neutral. "About what?" Such a simple question. Such a complicated answer. "About us." The words hung in the air between them like a confession. Saoirse's mask slipped just enough for him to glimpse the pain underneath, the same pain he'd been carrying for 25 years. "There is no us, Mr. Alexander. There hasn't been for a very long time." But even as she said it, even as she turned away from him once again, Jacob saw the truth in her eyes. Some things, once broken, left scars that never fully faded. And some love stories were written in coffee stains and trembling hands, in the spaces between what was said and what could never be taken back. The words hung between them like a verdict. "There is no us, Mr. Alexander. There hasn't been for a very long time." Jacob watched Saoirse walk away, her spine straight despite the tremor in her voice. The formal distance of Mr. Alexander cut deeper than any accusation could have. He stared into his coffee cup, seeing his reflection fractured in the dark surface. Across the diner, Saoirse busied herself wiping down tables that were already clean. Her movements were sharp, almost aggressive, as if she could scrub away the last hour along with the coffee rings. Every few seconds, she'd glance toward the kitchen door like a trapped animal calculating escape routes. Jacob pulled out his phone, pretending to check emails while his world tilted sideways. The screen showed 17 missed calls from his assistant, 12 text messages about the Singapore merger, and a calendar notification for tomorrow's board meeting. The digital demands of his empire felt suddenly trivial compared to the woman 20 feet away who was methodically destroying a paper napkin with shaking fingers. A new customer entered, the bell's cheerful chime jarring in the tense atmosphere. The man was tall, wearing oil-stained coveralls and a weary expression that suggested a long day at whatever job kept his hands permanently stained with honest work. He slid into a booth near the window and smiled when Saoirse approached. "Hey, beautiful." "The usual." Jacob's jaw clenched at the casual endearment, but he watched Saoirse's face transform. The professional mask softened into something genuine, almost maternal. "Long day, Connor?" She poured coffee without being asked, her movements fluid and natural. "Transmission job from hell. Been under that hood since 6 this morning." Connor stretched, his joints popping audibly. "How's Kelsey doing with her college applications?" "She submitted her last one yesterday. UC Davis for veterinary science." Pride radiated from Saoirse's voice. 17 years old and already knows exactly what she wants to do with her life. Gets that from her mama. Smart women run in the McMahon family. Jacob's chest constricted. Kelsey. Saoirse had a daughter. 17 years old. The math was simple and devastating. She'd moved on, built a life, raised a child. While he'd been acquiring companies and building his fortune, she'd been creating something infinitely more valuable. "I'll get your meatloaf," Saoirse said, squeezing Connor's shoulder before heading toward the kitchen. As she passed Jacob's booth, he caught her wrist gently. The contact sent electricity through both of them, but neither pulled away immediately. "Please." 5 minutes. Her dark eyes searched his face, looking for something she didn't seem to find. "I have customers to serve. After your shift, then. I have a second job at the hospital. Night cleaning crew." She pulled her wrist free, but not roughly. Some of us never had the luxury of choosing just one career path. The words weren't accusatory, but they landed like physical blows. Jacob released her, watching her disappear into the kitchen with Connor's order. Through the pass-through window, he could see her leaning against a steel counter, her eyes closed as if gathering strength for whatever came next. His phone buzzed. Marcus again. "Sir, the contracts for the Singapore deal need your review by 8 p.m. Eastern. Also, the Wall Street Journal wants a comment on the Hartwell acquisition." Jacob stared at the phone, at the world of quarterly reports and stock prices that had consumed his life for 2 decades. 24 hours ago, this call would have sent him into immediate action. Now it felt like noise from another universe. "Handle it," he said simply. "Sir. All of it. Handle all of it." He ended the call and watched through the kitchen window as Saoirse loaded Connor's plate with meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans. She moved with the efficiency of someone who'd done these motions thousands of times. But Jacob remembered when those same hands had sketched molecular diagrams and written lab reports that impressed professors twice her age. When she emerged with Connor's dinner, Jacob made another attempt. "That scholarship you mentioned, UC Davis. Those are expensive dreams." Saoirse set the plate down with controlled precision, but Jacob saw her knuckles whiten as she gripped the edge of the table. "We manage just fine, thank you." "I didn't mean." "I know exactly what you meant." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the force of years of accumulated hurt. The poor little waitress struggling to send her kid to college. The charity case who didn't make it out of her small town. "Is that what you see when you look at me?" "That's not what I see at all." "Then what do you see, Jacob?" His name on her lips felt like absolution and condemnation in equal measure. She dropped the formal distance, and the raw pain underneath was worse than her professional politeness had been. "I see the woman who got a perfect score on her SATs. Who wanted to cure cancer and probably could have. Who used to fall asleep reading medical journals because she found them more interesting than any novel." His voice grew rougher. "I see the girl who deserved so much better than what life gave her." "What life gave me?" Saoirse laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Life didn't give me anything, Jacob. Life offered me choices, and I made them. Just like you made yours." Before he could respond, the kitchen timer buzzed, and she was moving again, checking on other customers, refilling coffee cups, maintaining the careful dance that kept a small-town diner running. But Jacob could see the cracks in her armor now, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes when she talked to the regular customers who clearly adored her. At 6:30, the dinner rush began. Families filled the booths, teenagers claimed the counterstools, and Saoirse moved between them all like a conductor orchestrating a familiar symphony. Jacob watched her interact with a young couple celebrating their anniversary, an elderly woman who needed help reading the menu, a group of high school students counting quarters to pay for pie and coffee. With each interaction, Jacob saw deeper into who she'd become. The girl he'd loved had grown into a woman of remarkable strength, someone who found dignity in service and took genuine pleasure in others' happiness. She remembered everyone's preferences, asked about sick relatives, and somehow made each customer feel like the most important person in the room. This was what she'd built with her life. Not a medical practice or research lab, but something equally healing. A place where people felt valued, fed, understood. The realization humbled him in ways his business success never could. Around 7 o'clock, a commotion at the counter drew his attention. A well-dressed couple in their 50s were arguing loudly with Mel, who'd returned for the evening shift. "This is completely unacceptable," the woman was saying, her voice carrying the authority of someone unaccustomed to being denied. "We have a reservation at Le Bernardin in 3 hours, and our car has broken down. We need transportation to Los Angeles immediately." "Ma'am, I understand your frustration," Mel replied patiently, "but this is a diner, not a car service. The nearest rental place is closed until morning." The man waved his credit card dismissively. "We'll pay whatever it takes. Someone here must have a car we can borrow." Jacob recognized the type immediately. Wealthy, entitled, accustomed to solving problems by throwing money at them. A few years ago, he might have been sympathetic. Now he just felt embarrassed by association. Saoirse approached the couple with a coffee pot and her professional smile. "Can I help you folks with anything?" The woman looked her up and down with unconcealed disdain. "Unless you're hiding a limousine in the kitchen, I doubt it." "Actually," Saoirse said calmly, "my neighbor runs a taxi service. He's probably available if you'd like me to call." "A taxi?" The woman's voice suggested she'd been offered transportation via garbage truck. "Do you have any idea who we are?" "I'm sorry, should I?" The man stepped forward, clearly frustrated. "I'm Bradley Westfield. Westfield Holdings? We own half the commercial real estate in Beverly Hills." Saoirse nodded politely, unimpressed. "That's nice. Would you like me to call Danny about the taxi?" "This is ridiculous," Bradley muttered. "We're stranded in the middle of nowhere with—" He gestured vaguely at the diner's modest surroundings. "With good food and friendly service," Saoirse finished. "The taxi will cost about $60 to get you to the airport in Bakersfield, where you can catch a flight to LAX. Or you can stay angry about circumstances beyond anyone's control. Your choice." The couple exchanged glances, clearly debating between practicality and wounded pride. Jacob found himself holding his breath, waiting to see how they'd respond to Saoirse's quiet strength. "Fine," Bradley said finally. "Call your taxi friend." As Saoirse moved toward the phone behind the counter, the woman made one final observation loud enough for the entire diner to hear. "Well, I suppose we can't all afford standards." The casual cruelty of the comment hit Jacob like a physical blow. He saw Saoirse's shoulders tense, watched her pause mid-dial as the insult found its mark. Around the diner, other customers had gone quiet, their conversations suspended as they witnessed this small act of social violence. This was his world. These were his people, successful, wealthy, convinced that money equated to worth. The realization that he'd become one of them, that Saoirse might see him as cut from the same cloth as the Westfields, made him physically sick. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The sound drew everyone's attention, including Saoirse's. "Actually," Jacob said, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent diner, "I can offer you a ride." The Westfields turned toward him with visible relief. Here, finally, was someone who looked like he belonged in their world. Expensive suit, confident bearing, the unmistakable aura of wealth and power. "Thank you," Bradley said, extending his hand. "I'm Bradley Westfield, and this is my wife, Patricia. We'd be happy to compensate you for your trouble." Jacob looked at the outstretched hand but didn't take it. Instead, he walked to the counter where Saoirse stood frozen, the phone halfway to her ear. "Actually, I changed my mind," he said, never taking his eyes off Saoirse. "I think Danny's taxi sounds like the perfect solution. Some of us appreciate honest work and the people who do it with dignity." The words landed like grenades in the quiet diner. Patricia Westfield's face flushed red, while her husband sputtered indignantly. "I beg your pardon?" Jacob finally looked at them, and when he spoke, his voice carried the cold authority of boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions. "You heard me. This woman offered you a solution to your problem with grace and professionalism. Your response was to insult her and everyone else in this establishment. I suggest you take the taxi and consider yourselves fortunate that people like Saoirse exist to help entitled strangers who wouldn't know class if it served them coffee." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, Connor began to clap. The elderly woman in the corner booth joined him, then the young couple, then everyone else in the diner. The applause wasn't loud or theatrical, but it carried the weight of recognition. Someone had finally stood up for what was right. The Westfields left in a huff, muttering about lawsuits and reviews. The moment the door closed behind them, normal conversation resumed, but Jacob could feel the weight of Saoirse's gaze on him. When he turned to look at her, her expression was unreadable. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." They stared at each other across the counter, the same few feet of distance that might as well have been an ocean. Jacob had thought defending her would bridge the gap between them, but if anything, she seemed more guarded now. "I should get back to work," she said finally. "Saoirse, wait." But she was already moving away, gathering menus and clearing tables with renewed purpose. The protective walls were back up, higher than ever. Jacob returned to his booth and ordered dinner he couldn't taste, watching Saoirse navigate the evening crowd with practiced ease. Every time their eyes met accidentally, she looked away first. The woman who'd once told him all her secrets now treated him like a stranger who'd briefly wandered into her carefully constructed world. By 9 o'clock, the diner had emptied except for Jacob and an elderly man reading a newspaper in the corner. Saoirse was wiping down tables and stacking chairs, preparing for her shift to end and her second job to begin. Jacob left a $50 tip on a $12 meal and walked to the counter where she was counting the register. "Saoirse." She looked up, her dark eyes reflecting exhaustion and something else he couldn't identify. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for what you did with those people. That wasn't necessary, but it was kind. It was overdue." They looked at each other across the counter, and for a moment Jacob glimpsed the girl who'd once believed in forever. Then the moment passed, and the woman returned. "I have to go," she said. "My shift at the hospital starts in 20 minutes." Jacob nodded, accepting the dismissal. But as she gathered her purse and jacket, he couldn't stop himself from asking the question that had been burning in his chest all day. "Are you happy?" Saoirse paused in the doorway, her back to him. When she answered, her voice was so quiet he almost missed it. "I'm surviving. Some days, that's enough." Then she was gone, leaving Jacob alone in the empty diner with the ghosts of choices that couldn't be unmade and words that couldn't be unsaid. Outside, through the window, he watched her climb into a dented Honda and drive away into the California night. The taillights disappeared around the corner, and Jacob was left staring at his reflection in the glass, wondering if it was possible to love someone you'd lost so completely that even finding them again felt like another kind of goodbye. Jacob sat in his rental car outside the Valley Regional Hospital, the engine ticking as it cooled in the October night air. Through the lobby's glass doors, he could see Saoirse's Honda parked in the employee section, dented but dependable like everything else in her carefully managed life. He'd driven here without conscious decision, following some magnetic pull he couldn't name or resist. The rational part of his mind cataloged all the reasons this was inappropriate. She'd made her boundaries clear, he had a flight to catch in the morning, Marcus was probably having an aneurysm over the ignored calls stacking up on his phone. None of it mattered. 25 years of careful control had cracked the moment he saw her face across that diner, and now he was free-falling into territory that had no business plans or risk assessments. The hospital's automatic doors opened with a mechanical sigh, and Jacob stepped into the fluorescent bright lobby. The smell hit him immediately, industrial disinfectant layered over human suffering and hope. Behind the reception desk, a young man with tired eyes looked up from his computer. "Visiting hours ended at 9, sir. I'm looking for someone who works here. Night cleaning crew. Saoirse McMahon." The receptionist's expression shifted to something more interested. "You family." Jacob hesitated. What was he exactly? An old friend. "She's probably up on the 3rd floor by now. Pediatrics wing. But I can't let you wander around the hospital without authorization." "Could you call her?" Tell her Jacob Alexander is here." The name meant nothing to the young man, but he picked up the phone anyway. Jacob listened to half a conversation conducted in hospital shorthand, watching the elevator numbers blink as people moved through the building's vertical maze. "She says to meet her in the cafeteria. Down this hall, follow the blue line." Jacob's footsteps echoed in the empty corridor. The blue line led him past darkened offices and treatment rooms, through the ghostly landscape of a hospital after hours. Occasionally he'd pass a nurse or orderly, their soft shoes silent on the polished floor, guardians of sleep and healing. The cafeteria was a cavern of stacked chairs and mopped floors, lit by security lighting that cast everything in shades of institutional beige. Saoirse sat at a corner table, still wearing her diner uniform but with a hospital ID badge clipped to her collar. She'd pulled her hair back into a ponytail, and without makeup, she looked younger but more fragile. "You shouldn't be here, Jacob." He sat across from her uninvited, noting the coffee cup in her hands and the sandwich wrapper beside it. Dinner from a vending machine, eaten alone in an empty cafeteria. "When did you start working 2 jobs?" "About 12 years ago. Kelsey needed dental work that our insurance wouldn't cover." She took a sip of coffee and made a face. "This stuff could strip paint. Tell me about her." "Kelsey." Saoirse's whole demeanor changed at her daughter's name. The defensive walls lowered slightly, replaced by something that looked like joy struggling through exhaustion. "She's everything I dreamed of being at her age. Confident, focused, uncompromising about what she wants from life." Saoirse pulled out her phone and scrolled to a photo, a beautiful teenager with Saoirse's eyes and a smile that could power cities. She volunteers at the animal shelter on weekends, maintains a 4.2 GPA, and somehow still finds time to beat me at Scrabble. "She looks like you. She acts like me too. Stubborn as granite when she sets her mind to something." Saoirse's smile faded as reality reasserted itself. "Jacob, what are you doing here?" "I don't know." The honesty surprised them both. "I had dinner at the hotel, answered emails, reviewed contracts. All the things I do every night. But I kept thinking about what you said. About surviving. It's not your problem anymore. Maybe it never stopped being my problem." Saoirse set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. Don't do that to either of us." "Do what?" "Romanticize the past. We were kids, Jacob. 18 years old and convinced we understood forever. People grow up, grow apart, make different choices. It doesn't mean anyone was wrong." But her voice lacked conviction, and Jacob pressed the advantage. "You were supposed to be Dr. Saoirse McMahon by now. Published researcher, department head, maybe running your own lab. Instead you're working 2 jobs to send your daughter to the college you never got to attend." "And you were supposed to be what?" "A small-town accountant married to his high school sweetheart." Saoirse's tone sharpened. "You built an empire, Jacob. You're worth more money than most countries. By any measure, you won." "Did I?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Saoirse studied his face in the harsh cafeteria lighting, looking for deception or manipulation. Whatever she saw there made her shoulders sag slightly. "You can't fix the past with money." "I'm not trying to fix the past. I'm trying to understand how we got here." A maintenance cart rattled past the cafeteria entrance, pushed by a woman in scrubs who nodded at Saoirse. The interruption reminded them both where they were and why. "I have to start my rounds in 10 minutes. Then talk to me for 10 minutes. Not as the woman who's been hurt, just as Saoirse. Tell me what happened after I left." She was quiet for so long Jacob thought she might refuse. When she finally spoke, her voice was distant, as if she was recounting someone else's story. "I got into Berkeley. Full scholarship. Pre-med track, just like we planned." She traced patterns on the table with her finger. "I lasted 1 semester. What happened? Dad had his first heart attack Thanksgiving weekend. Mom couldn't handle the medical bills and his care by herself. I came home for Christmas break and never went back. Jacob felt something cold settle in his stomach. You gave up Berkeley to take care of your parents? I gave up Berkeley because it was the right thing to do. Family first. You remember my father, how he worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. When he needed me, there wasn't a choice to make. The simple dignity of her sacrifice hit Jacob like a physical blow. While he'd been networking and climbing academic ladders, she'd been changing bedpans and holding vigil in hospital rooms. You could have called me. And said what? Come home and throw away your Stanford scholarship because my family's falling apart. Saoirse shook her head. You were 3,000 miles away building the life we'd dreamed about. I wasn't going to be the anchor that dragged you down. So you became the anchor for everyone else. I became a daughter who honored her parents' sacrifices. Jacob wanted to argue that there might have been other ways, that love should have found a solution that didn't require her to give up everything. But the certainty in her voice told him those arguments had been fought and settled 25 years ago. What about medical school later? After your father recovered? He didn't recover. The heart attack was the first of 6. Each one weaker, requiring more care. Mom developed early-onset Alzheimer's when I was 23. By then I had Kelsey to think about too. Kelsey's father isn't in the picture. Never was, really. Just a mistake I made when I was lonely and grieving and stupid enough to think someone else might fill the hole you left behind. The words cut deep, but Jacob heard the pain underneath the anger. Saoirse. Don't you dare pity me. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I made my choices, just like you made yours. I have a daughter I love more than my own life, work that matters, and people who depend on me. Maybe it's not the fairy tale we imagined when we were 18, but it's real and it's mine. She walked toward the cafeteria exit, but Jacob caught up with her in the hallway. Wait, please. Jacob, I have work to do. People are counting on me to show up. The way your family counted on you. The way Kelsey counts on you. The way everyone in that diner counts on you to remember their coffee preferences and ask about their sick relatives. He stepped in front of her, forcing her to meet his eyes. When do you get to count on someone else? The question hit its mark. For just a moment, Saoirse's carefully maintained composure cracked, and Jacob saw the exhaustion underneath. 25 years of being strong for everyone else, of putting her own dreams on permanent hold while she served everyone else's needs. That's not how life works for people like me. What if it could be? Jacob, stop. What if there was another way? There isn't. But she didn't move away, and Jacob took that as encouragement. There could be. If you'd let me. Let you what? Rescue me. Write a check and solve all my problems. Her voice rose, echoing in the empty hallway. I'm not a charity case or a business problem you can acquire and fix. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Because standing here in this hallway 25 years too late, offering vague possibilities like some corporate fairy godfather, isn't helping either of us move forward. A nurse rounded the corner, pushing a cart of medications. She glanced at them curiously but continued on her rounds. The interruption reminded them both that they were having this conversation in a public place where Saoirse's professional reputation mattered. I should go, Saoirse said quietly. Mrs. Patterson in room 314 always asks for her floors to be mopped twice. She has OCD, and the routine helps her sleep. The casual intimacy of her knowledge about the patient's needs highlighted everything Jacob admired about the woman she'd become. She noticed people, remembered their preferences, took care of them in ways that went far beyond job requirements. How many patients know your name? Most of them. Why? At my company, I'm surrounded by hundreds of employees. Vice presidents, department heads, people who've worked there for years. I couldn't tell you half their names, much less their personal stories. That's different. You're running a billion-dollar company. I'm mopping floors. You're healing people, creating moments of peace and dignity in the worst times of their lives. Tell me which one of us is doing more important work." Saoirse stared at him, and for the first time since he'd walked into the diner, her defensive mask slipped completely away. What he saw underneath was a woman who'd forgotten how to dream for herself, who'd been giving so much for so long that she'd lost track of what she might want to receive. "I can't do this with you, Jacob. Not here, not now. Maybe not ever." "Why?" "Because I remember what it felt like when you left the first time. Because I can't afford to hope for things that don't exist. Because I have responsibilities that can't wait while I figure out what some impossible conversation in a hospital hallway might mean." She pulled her hospital ID from her pocket and headed toward the elevator bank. Jacob watched her press the call button, saw her check her watch, noted the way she squared her shoulders as she prepared to return to the work that defined her life. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding. "Saoirse!" She turned back, one hand holding the elevator door open. "I'm not leaving town tomorrow, Jacob. I canceled my flight. I'm staying until we finish this conversation. There's nothing left to say. There's 25 years of things to say." The elevator began to beep insistently, and Saoirse had to make a choice. She could step inside and end this, or she could acknowledge that maybe, despite all the hurt and distance and impossibility, there were still things worth fighting for. She let the elevator doors close and walked back to where Jacob stood waiting. 3 days, she said. "I work doubles through Wednesday, then I have Thursday off. If you're still here Thursday morning, we can talk. Really talk. But after that, you go back to your life and I go back to mine. No drama, no promises, no looking back. Thursday morning. Where? The diner. 6 a.m., before the breakfast crowd. Mel owes me a favor." Jacob nodded, knowing he was agreeing to terms that might break his heart all over again. Thursday at 6. The next elevator arrived, and this time Saoirse stepped inside without hesitation. As the doors began to close, she spoke one last time. "Jacob, don't do this if you're not serious. Don't show up Thursday morning unless you're prepared for whatever conversation we're going to have." "I'll be there." The doors closed, and Jacob was alone in the hospital hallway with the sound of his own heartbeat and the distant beep of machines keeping vigil over the sleeping sick. Through a nearby window, he could see the lights of Bakersfield stretching toward the mountains, a modest city where people like Saoirse built lives of quiet dignity and unrecognized heroism. He had 3 days to figure out what he wanted to say to the woman who'd once been his whole world, who'd sacrificed her dreams for love and duty while he'd built an empire on ambition and careful emotional distance. 3 days to decide if he was brave enough to risk everything he'd become for a chance at everything he'd lost. Walking back through the hospital corridors, Jacob passed the patients' rooms where Saoirse would spend the next 6 hours making sure their environment was clean and peaceful. In room 314, he glimpsed an elderly woman lying awake, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow, Saoirse would mop her floors twice and probably stay an extra few minutes to make sure she was comfortable. This was love, Jacob realized. Not the grand gestures or passionate declarations, but the daily choice to show up, to care, to put someone else's needs before your own comfort. Saoirse had been practicing this kind of love for 25 years while he'd been learning to maximize quarterly profits. Thursday morning couldn't come fast enough. But first, he had to decide what version of himself he wanted to be when it arrived. Outside in the parking lot, Jacob sat in his rental car and called Marcus. "Sir, thank God. The Singapore deal is falling apart, and the board wants. Marcus, I need you to clear my schedule through Friday." "Sir." "Cancel everything. Postpone the board meeting. Handle Singapore however you think best. I trust your judgment." The silence on the other end was so complete Jacob thought the call had dropped. "Marcus. I'm sorry, sir. Did you just say you trust my judgment about a $2 billion acquisition?" "I did." Are you feeling well? Jacob looked up at the hospital's lit windows, thinking about the woman inside who was probably helping Mrs. Patterson settle in for the night. I'm feeling like maybe it's time I figured out what's actually important. Thursday morning arrived wrapped in Bakersfield fog, the kind that clung to the San Joaquin Valley like a gray blanket hiding secrets. Jacob sat in his rental car outside Mel's diner at 5:45 a.m., watching the windows glow amber in the pre-dawn darkness. 3 days of waiting had stretched like years, filled with restless walks through unfamiliar neighborhoods and phone calls to Marcus that grew shorter each time his assistant tried to drag him back into corporate emergencies. Through the diner's windows, he could see movement. Mel himself was there early, flipping switches and starting coffee machines, preparing for another day of feeding a town that ran on bacon grease and honest conversation. No sign of Saoirse yet. Jacob's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Board meeting postponed to Monday. Singapore deal on life support. Press asking questions about your absence. Need guidance ASAP. He turned the phone face down without responding. For the first time in 15 years, Alexander Industries would have to function without his constant oversight. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like stepping out of a cage he'd built around himself one successful quarter at a time. At exactly 6 a.m., Saoirse's Honda pulled into the parking lot. She sat behind the wheel for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, gathering courage for a conversation that could reshape the careful boundaries of her world. When she finally emerged, Jacob saw she was wearing jeans and a soft blue sweater instead of her diner uniform. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, and she looked younger, more vulnerable than the armored waitress who'd served him coffee 4 days ago. Mel unlocked the door as they approached, his weathered face creased with curiosity and protective concern. Morning, Saoirse. Coffee's fresh, and I've got blueberry pancakes if you change your mind about breakfast. He studied Jacob with the suspicious eye of a man who'd watched too many people come and go from his regular customers' lives. You must be the businessman causing all the fuss. Jacob Alexander. Thank you for opening early. Wasn't my idea. Mel's handshake was firm, testing. But Saoirse asked, and she's family here. You treat her right, or you'll answer to more folks than just me. They settled into the corner booth where this had all begun, the same cracked vinyl seats and scarred formica table that had witnessed their first stunned recognition. Saoirse wrapped her hands around a coffee mug like it was armor, while Jacob struggled to find words that could bridge 25 years of silence. You stayed, she said finally. I said I would. Men have said a lot of things to me over the years. Most of them didn't follow through. The quiet accusation hung between them, and Jacob felt the weight of every unkept promise, every letter unwritten, every phone call never made. He'd spent 3 decades building a reputation for reliability in business, while leaving the most important relationship of his life to wither from neglect. Tell me about Stanford, Saoirse said, surprising him. Tell me about the life you built after you left. Jacob studied her face, looking for traps or hidden motivations. Instead, he found genuine curiosity mixed with something that might have been pride. You really want to know? I've wondered for 25 years. Whether you were happy, whether you ever thought about us, whether the dreams we made together meant anything once you got to live them alone. The honesty in her voice cut through his defensive instincts. She deserved the truth, even if it revealed how hollow his victories had been. Stanford was everything we imagined it would be. Brilliant professors, unlimited resources, classmates who were going to change the world. I threw myself into it completely. Double major in computer science and business, internships every summer, networking events every weekend. And girls. The question was casual, but Jacob caught the tension underneath. Some. Nothing serious. I kept telling myself I was too busy, too focused on the future to get distracted by relationships. What changed? Graduate school. Harvard Business School. I met Rebecca Morrison my second year. She was everything I thought I should want. Smart, ambitious, connected to the right families and the right investment firms. Jacob traced patterns on the table, remembering. We got married the year after graduation. Big wedding in the Hamptons, merger of two promising careers. Did you love her? The question caught him off guard with its directness. Saoirse had always been like that, cutting straight to the heart of things while everyone else danced around the edges. I thought I did. Or maybe I loved the idea of her, the life we were supposed to build together. She was perfect on paper. But I kept comparing everything to a memory of an 18-year-old girl who used to help me with chemistry homework and believed I could conquer the world. Saoirse's eyes softened slightly, but she didn't let him off the hook. What happened to the marriage? It lasted 8 years. Long enough for me to build the company, go public, make our first billion. Rebecca got tired of coming second to spreadsheets and acquisition targets. She said living with me was like being married to a beautiful stranger who spoke only in quarterly projections. She wasn't wrong. No, she wasn't. The divorce was amicable, expensive, and completely predictable. She kept the house in Connecticut, I kept the company, and we both pretended we weren't relieved to end the performance. Mel appeared at their table with a coffee refill, his timing impeccable. You folks need more time, or should I start setting up for the breakfast crowd? A few more minutes, Saoirse said. Thank you, Mel. When they were alone again, she leaned forward slightly. No children. Rebecca wanted them eventually, but there was always another deal, another expansion, another reason to wait. By the time we had enough money to hire the best nannies and send kids to the best schools, we realized we didn't have enough love left to make it worthwhile. The admission hung in the air like a confession. Jacob had never said those words aloud, had barely admitted them to himself during the long nights in his empty penthouse. And after the divorce, I became exactly what you'd expect. The workaholic billionaire who dates models and actresses for magazine covers and charity galas. Beautiful women who look perfect in photographs and have nothing to say over dinner except how successful I am. Sounds lonely. It was. But loneliness felt safer than vulnerability. Easier to control than love. Saoirse was quiet for a long moment, processing his story. When she spoke again, her voice was gentler. Do you remember the night before you left for Stanford? We went to Miller's Point and stayed up until sunrise talking about our future. Jacob closed his eyes, and the memory rushed back with devastating clarity. They'd been 18 and immortal, drunk on possibility and each other's touch. Saoirse had worn his Letterman jacket over a white sundress, and they'd made promises under the stars that felt more binding than any legal contract. You said we'd make it work. Long distance for 4 years, then medical school for you somewhere close to wherever I ended up for my MBA. We had it all planned out. I believed every word of it, Jacob said. That night, holding you, I couldn't imagine any force on earth strong enough to keep us apart. So what happened? When did the plan fall apart? This was the conversation they'd never had, the post-mortem of their shared dreams that had been postponed for 25 years. Jacob felt like he was performing surgery on his own heart, but Saoirse deserved to understand how they'd ended up here. The first semester was brutal, harder than anything I'd ever experienced. 15-hour days, professors who seemed determined to break us, classmates who made high school valedictorians look average. I was drowning and too proud to admit it. You never told me any of that in your letters. Because I was scared you'd lose faith in me. Scared you'd realize I wasn't as brilliant as everyone in Bakersfield thought I was. So instead you just stopped writing? The hurt in her voice was still fresh after all these years, and Jacob realized his attempt to protect her feelings had caused infinitely more damage than honesty would have. I kept starting letters. Must have written 100 different drafts, trying to explain why I was failing, why I wasn't the person you'd fallen in love with. But every time I tried to put it on paper, it sounded like excuses or self-pity. I would have understood. I would have helped. I know that now. But at 18, terrified and failing for the first time in my life, I convinced myself that silence was kinder than disappointing you. And when you stopped failing, when you figured out how to succeed. Jacob met her eyes, knowing this was the moment that would define everything that came after. By then I'd built a life that didn't have space for the dreams we'd made together. I'd become someone who solved problems with strategy and willpower instead of love and partnership. I told myself you were better off without me. That wasn't your decision to make. No, it wasn't. It was cowardice dressed up as nobility. The bell above the diner door chimed, and Mel's early customers began filtering in. Coffee-seeking construction workers, nurses ending night shifts, the steady stream of people who kept small cities functioning while the rest of the world slept. Saoirse waved at a few familiar faces, exchanging quick smiles that demonstrated her place in this community's fabric. She belonged here in a way Jacob had never belonged anywhere, connected to people who knew her story and valued her presence. "My turn," she said, turning back to him. "You want to know what happened after you stopped writing?" Jacob nodded, though he wasn't sure he was ready for her truth. "I waited. Longer than I should have. Longer than anyone with sense would have. I checked the mail every day for 6 months, making excuses for your silence. Classes were demanding, you were busy, the postal service was slow." Saoirse. Then Teresa Martinez got a letter from her boyfriend at UCLA. Maria Santos heard from hers at UC Davis. Even quiet Jennifer Walsh was getting regular calls from her boyfriend at community college in Fresno. Her voice was matter-of-fact, but Jacob could hear the 18-year-old girl's pain underneath. That's when I knew it wasn't the postal service. "What did you do?" "I called Stanford. Spent my Christmas money on long-distance charges, trying to reach you. Your roommate said you were in the library, at study group, in class. Always somewhere else." Jacob remembered those calls now, the way his chest would tighten when his roommate mentioned a girl from California asking for him. He'd been too much of a coward to take the phone, too afraid of hearing disappointment in her voice. "The last time I called, some girl answered your room phone. Said you were out with friends and could she take a message. I hung up without saying anything. That was probably Rebecca. We weren't dating yet, but she spent a lot of time in our study group. It doesn't matter now. But that night, I finally understood that our forever had an expiration date I'd never noticed." The breakfast crowd was growing thicker around them, the diner filling with the comfortable chatter of people starting another day. Mel caught Saoirse's eye and tapped his watch, a gentle reminder that other customers needed tables. "We should probably wrap this up," Saoirse said, but she made no move to leave. "Not yet. Tell me about Berkeley. Tell me about giving up medical school." Her face changed, the careful composure cracking to reveal old grief. "You really want to hear this? I need to understand what my choices cost you." She took a deep breath, as if preparing to dive into cold water. "Dad's heart attack happened 2 days before my organic chemistry final. I was home for Thanksgiving, planning to spend the weekend studying, when Mom called from the hospital." Jacob could see it, 19-year-old Saoirse racing through emergency room corridors, her textbooks forgotten as she confronted the fragility of everything she'd taken for granted. He survived the first one, but barely. Triple bypass, weeks in intensive care, months of recovery that insurance only partially covered. Mom was working double shifts at the cannery, but medical bills were crushing us. "You could have taken student loans." "To cover what?" Dad couldn't work, Mom was exhausted, and I was 300 miles away studying protein synthesis while my family fell apart. The math wasn't complicated. "So you came home." "I finished my freshman year, then transferred to Bakersfield College. Told everyone it was temporary, just until Dad got back on his feet. I'd reapply to Berkeley the following year, maybe UC Davis. Medical school would just be delayed, not abandoned." But Jacob could see the end of that story in her eyes. "Your father never recovered. 5 more heart attacks over 6 years. Each one weaker, requiring more care. I became his nurse, Mom's emotional support, the family's primary breadwinner. Medical school became a fantasy I couldn't afford to indulge. And Kelsey. Saoirse's face softened at her daughter's name, maternal love temporarily overriding old pain. She was my light during the darkest period. Dad died when I was 25, Mom's Alzheimer's was getting worse, and I was working 3 jobs to keep us afloat. Then this beautiful, impossible baby arrived and gave me a reason to keep fighting. Her father. A mistake that taught me the difference between loneliness and love. He lasted until Kelsey was 6 months old, then decided fatherhood was too much responsibility for his artistic career. Saoirse's tone was matter-of-fact, but Jacob caught the old hurt underneath. I haven't heard from him in 16 years, and that's probably best for everyone. The parallels between their stories struck Jacob like a physical blow. Both of them had made choices based on fear and responsibility, sacrificing love for what seemed like necessity. The difference was that Saoirse's sacrifices had been for other people, while his had been for his own ambition. Do you regret it? Giving up Berkeley, medical school, the life you'd planned? Saoirse considered the question seriously, tracing the rim of her coffee cup as she thought. I regret that circumstances made the choice for me. I regret that being a good daughter meant giving up being anything else. But I don't regret the person those choices made me become. Even working 2 jobs to send your daughter to the college you never got to finish? Especially that. Kelsey gets to dream bigger than I did because I made sure she wouldn't have to choose between family loyalty and personal ambition. That's not a sacrifice. That's victory. The pride in her voice was unmistakable, and Jacob realized he was looking at a kind of success he'd never learned to measure. Saoirse had built her life around love and service, creating value that couldn't be quantified in quarterly reports or stock prices. She's lucky to have you as a mother. She's lucky to live in a time when smart women don't have to choose between caring for family and pursuing careers. When I was her age, those felt like mutually exclusive options. And now she's applying to veterinary programs at UC Davis and Colorado State. She'll be Dr. Kelsey McMahon someday, and she'll never have to wonder what she might have become if circumstances had been different. The simple statement carried the weight of a life spent ensuring someone else's dreams could flourish. Jacob thought about his own legacy, a company that would survive him, stock portfolios that would generate returns for decades, a reputation for business acumen that would outlast his memory. None of it felt as meaningful as the diploma Saoirse's daughter would earn next spring. I need to ask you something, Jacob said, his voice rougher than he intended. And I need you to be completely honest. Haven't I been? If I'd taken those phone calls, if I'd written back, if I'd come home that first Christmas instead of taking an internship in Silicon Valley, would it have changed anything? Saoirse was quiet for so long Jacob thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her words carried 25 years of wonder and regret. Yes, it would have changed everything. How? Because I would have known I mattered to you. I would have known that our love was worth fighting for, worth building a life around, worth the risk of disappointment and failure. She looked directly at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I would have known that when life got difficult, we'd face it together instead of apart. The truth hit Jacob like a physical blow. All his careful rationalizations, his belief that silence had been kindness, his conviction that success justified abandonment, all of it crumbled in the face of her simple honesty. I'm sorry, he said, and the words felt inadequate for the magnitude of what he'd lost, what he'd cost them both. I know you are, but sorry doesn't give me back 25 years of wondering if I was worth remembering. It doesn't give me back the medical career I dreamed about or the partnership I thought we were building. Then what can I do? How do I make amends for the choices that hurt you? Saoirse stood up, gathering her purse and jacket, preparing to leave. The breakfast crowd was in full swing now, and their private conversation was becoming a public spectacle. You don't make amends for the past, Jacob. You make better choices about the future. She was halfway to the door when he caught up with her, his hand gentle on her arm. "Wait. Is there a future? For us, I mean." Saoirse turned to face him, and for a moment, he saw the 18-year-old girl who'd believed in forever. "I don't know. I honestly don't know if either of us is capable of the kind of love we're talking about. You've spent 25 years building walls around your heart, and I've spent 25 years learning not to trust in promises. But you're willing to try? I'm willing to see what happens next." "That's not the same thing." Jacob nodded, understanding that he was being offered a chance, not a guarantee. After 25 years of certainty built on careful control, uncertainty felt like stepping off a cliff. "What happens next?" "You go back to your hotel. I go home and help Kelsey with her veterinary school applications. Tomorrow we both return to our regular lives and see how they feel knowing what we know now. And then we find out if the people we've become can build something real together, or if we're just two middle-aged people trying to recapture something that only existed when we were young enough to believe in fairy tales." She walked away without looking back, leaving Jacob standing in the parking lot with the smell of bacon and coffee and the sound of a small city waking up to another day of ordinary miracles. Through the diner windows, he could see Mel wiping down tables and talking to customers, the rhythm of small-town community that had sustained Saoirse through 25 years of quiet heroism. This was her world, built on relationships and responsibility and the daily choice to show up for people who needed her. Jacob pulled out his phone and stared at the screen full of missed calls and urgent messages from his other life. For the first time in decades, he had to choose between the empire he'd built and the love he'd lost. The choice, he realized, would define everything that came after. Friday morning came soft and golden over Bakersfield, the kind of California autumn day that made even industrial neighborhoods look like paintings. Jacob had spent the night walking empty streets, his mind churning through everything Saoirse had revealed. By dawn, he'd made a decision that would either prove his transformation or expose him as the same scared boy who'd chosen silence over love 25 years ago. He arrived at Kelsey's veterinary clinic at exactly 7 a.m., before the first appointments of the day. The small animal hospital sat on the corner of Chester Avenue and Truxton Street, its cheerful blue exterior dotted with painted paw prints and a sign that read Paws and Hearts Animal Care, Dr. Martinez and Associates. Through the window, he could see a young woman in bright purple scrubs setting up examination rooms. This had to be Kelsey McMahon, though she looked nothing like the mental image he'd carried from Saoirse's descriptions. Where he'd expected to see echoes of her mother's careful composure, he found someone radiating confident energy. Kelsey moved with the easy grace of someone who'd found her calling early and never looked back. The bell chimed as Jacob entered, and Kelsey looked up from organizing medical supplies. Her smile was immediate and genuine, the kind that made strangers feel like old friends. "We're not actually open until 8, but if it's an emergency, Dr. Martinez should be here any minute." "I'm not here about an animal. I'm Jacob Alexander. I believe your mother mentioned me." Recognition flickered across her face, followed by curiosity and something that might have been protective concern. Kelsey had inherited her mother's directness along with her warmth. "You're the businessman from the diner. Mom's been different since she met you. Quieter but also more alive somehow. Like she's remembering something she'd forgotten." The observation was startlingly perceptive for someone barely 21. Jacob found himself looking at a young woman who possessed her mother's emotional intelligence combined with a confidence Saoirse had never been allowed to fully develop. "I was hoping we could talk. If you have time before work starts." Kelsey studied him for a moment, her assessment thorough and unapologetic. Whatever she saw must have passed some internal test, because she gestured toward a small break room in the back. "Coffee's terrible, but it's strong. Mom says you used to know each other in high school." "We did. We were close." "How close?" The question was casual, but Jacob caught the protective edge underneath. This was a daughter who'd watched her mother navigate disappointment and heartbreak, who'd learned to be suspicious of men who appeared with promises they might not keep. "We were in love. Planning to get married after college." I made some choices that ended things between us. What kind of choices? Jacob had expected this interrogation, but Kelsey's directness still caught him off guard. She wasn't going to accept vague explanations or polite deflections. I chose my career over our relationship. I stopped writing, stopped calling, convinced myself she was better off without me. It was cowardice disguised as nobility. Kelsey poured 2 cups of coffee that looked strong enough to dissolve metal. And now you're back because? Because I realized I've spent 25 years building a successful life around a completely empty heart. Because seeing your mother again made me remember what it felt like to be fully human instead of just professionally competent. That's a pretty speech. But what do you want from her? The question hung between them, and Jacob realized he was being interviewed by someone with more emotional intelligence than most corporate executives he'd negotiated with. Kelsey wasn't just making conversation. She was evaluating his worthiness to be part of her mother's carefully constructed world. I want another chance. A real one this time, built on honesty instead of fantasy. And what are you offering in return? Everything. My attention, my respect, my commitment to putting our relationship before my ambition. The love I was too scared to give her when we were young. Kelsey sipped her coffee, considering his words. You know she's not the same girl you left behind, right? She's not waiting in some romantic suspended animation for you to come rescue her from her ordinary life. I'm beginning to understand that. Good. Because the woman who raised me single-handedly, who worked 3 jobs to keep our family afloat, who sacrificed her own dreams so I could have mine. She doesn't need rescuing. She needs a partner worthy of the incredible person she's become. The pride in Kelsey's voice was unmistakable, and Jacob felt a sharp pang of loss for all the years he hadn't known this remarkable young woman existed. Saoirse had raised a daughter who was fierce, loyal, and unafraid to challenge powerful men when necessary. Tell me about her. About who she is now, not who she was 25 years ago. Kelsey's expression softened slightly, recognizing genuine curiosity rather than polite small talk. She's the strongest person I know, but she doesn't realize it. She thinks strength means never asking for help, never admitting when she's overwhelmed, never putting her own needs first. That sounds lonely. It is. She spent so many years being the person everyone else needed her to be that I'm not sure she remembers who she wanted to be before life got in the way. Jacob thought about the confident, ambitious girl he'd known in high school, the one who'd tutored half their chemistry class and planned to become a pediatrician. That girl had been buried under decades of responsibility and disappointment, but yesterday at the diner, he'd caught glimpses of her still burning underneath. She mentioned you're applying to veterinary school. UC Davis and Colorado State. Early acceptance to both programs, full scholarships based on grades and research. Kelsey's matter-of-fact tone couldn't hide her pride in the achievement. That's incredible. Your mother must be thrilled. She cried for an hour when the Davis letter came. Happy tears, but also something else. Like she was proud and heartbroken at the same time. Jacob understood immediately. Saoirse was watching her daughter achieve everything she'd been forced to abandon, experiencing vicarious triumph mixed with personal grief for dreams deferred. She never talks about her own college plans, what she wanted to study before your grandfather got sick. Medical school. She wanted to be a pediatrician, help kids who didn't have access to good health care. Kelsey's voice grew quiet. Sometimes I catch her watching medical shows on TV, and she gets this look. Like she's remembering a different version of herself. The bell in the front office chimed, and Dr. Martinez's voice called out a greeting in rapid Spanish. Kelsey glanced at her watch and stood up. I need to get back to work. But before you go, I want to tell you something. Jacob waited, sensing this was the real reason she'd agreed to talk with him. My mom has been alone for most of my life. Not because she couldn't find someone, but because she set the bar so high that most men couldn't reach it. She saw what happened to her friends who settled for less than they deserved, and she decided being alone was better than being disappointed. What does that mean for me? It means if you're not absolutely certain you can be the man she needs, walk away now. Don't string her along while you figure out whether you're brave enough to choose love over convenience. The challenge was clear, and Jacob respected Kelsey for delivering it without apology. This was a young woman who'd watched her mother sacrifice and struggle, who'd inherited both Saoirse's protective instincts and her unwillingness to accept less than genuine commitment. I understand. Do you? Because she's already been abandoned by one man who claimed to love her. She won't survive it happening again. Jacob met her eyes, recognizing the fierce loyalty that had probably sustained Saoirse through the hardest years. I won't abandon her. Not this time. Then prove it. Not with grand gestures or expensive gifts, but with daily choices that show she matters more than your comfort zone. Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway, a small, energetic woman in her 50s who looked like she could handle any crisis with competence and humor. She introduced herself with a firm handshake and curious smile. You must be the mystery man Kelsey's been telling me about. The one who's got her mother all stirred up. Jacob Alexander. And I hope that's good stirred up, not bad. Remains to be seen. But Saoirse McMahon is one of the finest women I've ever known, so you better treat her like the treasure she is. Another protective voice, another reminder of the community that had sustained Saoirse when he'd failed her. Jacob was beginning to understand that winning her back meant proving himself worthy to an entire network of people who'd witnessed her strength and sacrifice. I intend to. Good. Now Kelsey, we've got a golden retriever with hip dysplasia coming in at 8:30, and Mrs. Patterson's cat needs his diabetes check. Time to get moving. Jacob thanked them both and headed toward the door, but Kelsey's voice stopped him. Mr. Alexander, if you hurt her again, you'll answer to me. And trust me, I'm a lot less forgiving than she is. The threat was delivered with a smile, but Jacob had no doubt it was completely serious. He nodded his understanding and walked out into the California sunshine, his phone already buzzing with another crisis from Seattle that would have to wait. Instead of heading back to his hotel, Jacob found himself driving through Bakersfield's residential neighborhoods, trying to understand the world that had shaped Saoirse and Kelsey. These weren't the manicured suburbs of his corporate life, but working-class streets where people knew their neighbors and children played in front yards protected by chain-link fences and fierce community loyalty. He pulled up in front of a small blue house on Eucalyptus Street, recognizing it from Saoirse's description as the place where she'd cared for her parents and raised her daughter. The front yard was neat but not elaborate, filled with practical plants that could survive Central Valley summers without constant attention. A swing hung from an old oak tree, probably installed when Kelsey was small. This was where Saoirse had built her real life, far from the fantasies they'd spun at 18. Every choice about this house, this neighborhood, this community reflected values Jacob was only beginning to understand. Stability over mobility. Relationships over opportunities. Daily presence over distant promises. His phone rang, startling him out of his contemplation. Marcus again, the fourth call this morning. Jacob, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for hours. The Singapore deal is imploding. The board is asking questions about your absence, and there are rumors in the Wall Street Journal about a hostile takeover attempt. Handle it. Handle what? The Singapore deal, or the board meeting, or the takeover rumors? All of it. You're perfectly capable of managing the company without my constant oversight. What's gotten into you? This isn't like you at all. Jacob looked at the little blue house where a woman had sacrificed her dreams to care for others, where a daughter had learned to set goals and achieve them through hard work rather than inherited advantage. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe the person I've been isn't worth preserving. You're scaring me, Jacob. Are you having some kind of breakdown? I'm having some kind of breakthrough. I'll call you Sunday night with instructions for the week. He hung up before Marcus could argue, then turned off the phone completely. For the first time in 15 years, Alexander Industries would function without his direct involvement for an entire weekend. The company would survive, the stock price would fluctuate, and the world would continue spinning without his careful management. Jacob drove to Saoirse's workplace, the hometown kitchen where she'd worked lunch shifts for the past 3 years. It was a family restaurant specializing in comfort food and generous portions, the kind of place where regulars had favorite tables and servers remembered how everyone liked their coffee. Through the windows, he could see Saoirse moving between tables with practiced efficiency, her smile genuine as she chatted with customers who clearly considered her a friend rather than just service staff. She wore a bright yellow uniform that should have looked institutional but somehow made her glow with warmth. Jacob watched her interact with an elderly man who seemed to be dining alone, the way she lingered at his table to chat about his grandchildren and listen to stories he probably told every waitress who'd sit still long enough. She brought him extra rolls without being asked and refilled his coffee before he noticed it was empty. This was Saoirse in her element, caring for others with the same attention to detail Jacob brought to corporate acquisitions. The difference was that her work created genuine human connections, while his created quarterly profits that would be forgotten by next year's shareholders' meeting. A text from Kelsey interrupted his observation. Mom gets off at 3 p.m. She usually stops at the grocery store on Palm Avenue, then goes home to check on Grandma before dinner. Just in case you were wondering about her routine. Jacob smiled at the young woman's transparent matchmaking. For someone who'd threatened him 20 minutes ago, she was remarkably helpful in facilitating his courtship of her mother. At exactly 3:15 p.m., Saoirse emerged from the restaurant carrying a takeout container that probably held dinner for her mother. She looked tired but content, the kind of bone-deep satisfaction that came from honest work completed with competence and care. Jacob approached carefully, not wanting to startle her after the emotional intensity of their previous conversations. "Hi!" She turned, her expression cycling through surprise, pleasure, and caution in the space of a heartbeat. "Jacob, what are you doing here?" "Hoping you might have time for a conversation that doesn't involve interrogating our past." "What kind of conversation?" "The kind where we talk about today. About who we are now, what we want, whether there's any possibility of building something real together." Saoirse glanced at her watch, calculating the time she needed for her mother's care against her curiosity about where this conversation might lead. "I need to check on Mom first. She gets confused if her dinner routine changes." "Can I come with you? I'd like to meet her." The request surprised them both. Jacob hadn't planned to ask, but he realized he wanted to understand every part of Saoirse's world, including the mother who'd shaped her sense of duty and sacrifice. She's not the woman she used to be. Alzheimer's has taken most of her memories, and she gets agitated around strangers sometimes. "I understand. But she's important to you, which makes her important to me." Saoirse studied his face, looking for signs of polite obligation or uncomfortable duty. Instead, she found genuine interest in meeting the woman who'd raised her. "Okay. But we take things slowly, and if she gets upset, you leave immediately." They drove separately to the house Jacob had observed earlier, Saoirse's Honda leading his rental car through familiar streets. The interior of her home was exactly what he'd expected. Clean, comfortable, filled with photographs documenting Kelsey's achievements and family celebrations from decades past. Margaret McMahon sat in a recliner facing a television playing old game shows, her white hair neatly combed and her clothes carefully chosen by someone who understood that dignity mattered even when memory failed. She looked up when they entered, her eyes bright with curiosity despite the confusion Jacob could see underneath. "Hi, Mom. I brought dinner and a friend I'd like you to meet." "A friend?" Margaret's voice carried the careful politeness of someone trying to hide their uncertainty. "Is this the young man Kelsey mentioned?" Saoirse shot Jacob a look that promised questions about his conversation with her daughter, but her voice remained gentle and patient. "This is Jacob, Mom. We knew each other in high school." "High school?" Margaret's face brightened with the kind of clarity that occasionally broke through the fog of dementia. Saoirse was so smart in high school. Top of her class, going to be a doctor someday. The simple statement hit Jacob like a physical blow, a reminder of dreams interrupted and potential unrealized. But Saoirse's response was immediate and warm. I found something even better, Mom. I got to raise Kelsey and take care of you. That's worth more than any career. Kelsey's applying to veterinary school, Margaret announced proudly, her maternal instincts intact even when other memories faded. She's going to help animals who can't help themselves. That's wonderful, Jacob said, settling into a chair where Margaret could see him clearly. You must be very proud of both your girls. Oh, I am. Saoirse works so hard, always has. Even as a little girl, she took care of everyone else before herself. Margaret's voice grew wistful. Sometimes I worry she forgot to take care of her own dreams. The conversation continued for an hour, Margaret drifting in and out of clarity but consistently warm and welcoming. Jacob found himself charmed by glimpses of the woman who'd raised Saoirse with such strong values, who'd instilled the sense of duty and compassion that defined her daughter's character. When Margaret began showing signs of fatigue, Saoirse gently suggested it was time for her evening routine. Jacob said his goodbyes and waited in the living room while Saoirse helped her mother prepare for bed. The walls around him told the story of a family that had faced challenges with grace and unity. School photos showing Kelsey's progression from gap-toothed kindergartner to confident high school graduate. Pictures of Saoirse at various ages, always smiling despite whatever struggles the camera couldn't capture. A formal portrait of Margaret and a man who must have been Saoirse's father, taken during happier times when the future seemed full of manageable possibilities. She likes you, Saoirse said, returning to the living room. She doesn't usually warm up to strangers that quickly. She's remarkable. I can see where you got your strength. And your stubbornness, according to Kelsey. They both laughed, the first moment of easy humor they'd shared since his return to her life. Jacob felt some of the tension between them beginning to ease, replaced by the comfortable familiarity that had made them inseparable as teenagers. Speaking of Kelsey, I stopped by the veterinary clinic this morning. She mentioned that. Said you passed her interrogation, barely. She's protective of you. I respect that. She's had to be. Growing up without a father figure, watching me struggle through difficult years. It made her fiercely loyal and maybe a little suspicious of men who make promises. Smart girl. She should be suspicious until I prove I deserve her trust. Saoirse curled up on the couch, tucking her feet under her in a gesture that transported Jacob back 25 years to countless evenings spent talking in her childhood bedroom. Some physical habits never changed, even when everything else about their lives had been transformed. What did you two talk about? You. Her plans for veterinary school. The fact that she'll probably never forgive me if I hurt you again. She said that. In more diplomatic terms, but yes. I got the impression she's perfectly capable of making my life miserable if I don't live up to her standards. She learned from the best, Saoirse said with a smile. I may look sweet, but I can be absolutely ruthless when someone threatens my family. Good to know. Though I'm hoping to join that family rather than threaten it. The words hung between them, more serious than the playful tone he'd intended. Saoirse's expression grew thoughtful as she considered the implications of what he'd said. Is that what you want? To be part of our family? I want to be part of your life in whatever way you'll have me. Family, partner, friend. I want to wake up knowing I'll see you that day and go to sleep knowing I'll see you tomorrow. That's a beautiful sentiment. But what does it mean practically? You live in Seattle. I live here. You run a billion-dollar company. I serve coffee and take care of my mother. How do we bridge that gap? The question he'd been avoiding finally landed between them with the weight of reality. Jacob had spent 3 days lost in romantic possibility without considering the logistical challenges of building a relationship across such different worlds. I don't know yet, but I know I want to figure it out together instead of making assumptions about what's possible. And your company, your responsibilities in Seattle. We'll have to adapt. The company survived before I ran it, and it can certainly function with less micromanagement. I built Alexander Industries to be successful, not to consume my entire life. You say that now, But what happens when there's a crisis that needs your attention? When staying here means missing an important meeting or losing a lucrative deal? The questions weren't accusations, but Jacob could hear the fear underneath them. Saoirse had been abandoned once by someone who chose ambition over love. She wasn't going to risk that heartbreak again without serious assurances. Then I handle the crisis remotely and let other people manage the meetings. I make choices that prioritize us over profits. That's easy to say when there's no real pressure. But you've built your identity around being indispensable to your company. Can you really walk away from that? Jacob considered the question seriously, recognizing that Saoirse deserved honesty rather than romantic promises he might not be able to keep. I don't know. I've never tried to build a life where personal relationships came first. But I know that everything I've achieved professionally feels empty compared to the possibility of building something real with you. And if you try it and discover you can't handle being less important to your company, if you realize you need the validation that comes from being the indispensable CEO, then I'll have learned something important about myself, and you'll be free to find someone capable of giving you the partnership you deserve. The admission surprised them both with its vulnerability. Jacob was acknowledging that his transformation might be incomplete, that good intentions might not be enough to overcome decades of ingrained habits. That's terrifyingly honest. Terrifying for me too. I've spent most of my adult life controlling outcomes through careful planning and strategic thinking. This feels like jumping off a cliff and hoping I'll figure out how to fly before I hit the ground. Saoirse was quiet for a long moment, studying his face as if trying to read the truth underneath his words. Whatever she saw must have reassured her, because her posture relaxed slightly. So where do we start? If we're going to try building something together, what's the first step? We spend time together without the pressure of defining what this is or where it's going. We remember why we fell in love the first time and discover who we are as the people we've become. That sounds reasonable. Almost too reasonable to trust. Jacob laughed, recognizing the suspicion he'd seen in Kelsey's eyes earlier. You McMahon women really don't believe in making things easy, do you? We believe in making things real. Easy is overrated if it doesn't last. Then let's make it real. Complicated, messy, uncertain, but absolutely real. Saoirse smiled, and for the first time since his return to Bakersfield, Jacob saw her guard drop completely. The careful waitress persona, the protective mother mask, the dutiful daughter role, all of it fell away to reveal the woman he'd fallen in love with 25 years ago, transformed by experience but fundamentally unchanged in all the ways that mattered. Okay, Jacob Alexander. Let's see if you can handle real. Outside, Bakersfield settled into another peaceful evening. A small city where ordinary people lived extraordinary lives of quiet heroism and daily love. Inside a modest house on Eucalyptus Street, two people who'd lost each other once began the careful work of finding their way back to something that might last forever this time. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in decades, uncertainty felt like possibility rather than threat. The next morning arrived gray and cold, unusual weather for October in Bakersfield that seemed to mirror the tension building in Jacob's chest. He'd slept poorly in his hotel room, alternating between euphoria over his evening with Saoirse and panic about the 17 missed calls from Marcus that had accumulated overnight. At 6 a.m., he finally surrendered to the inevitable and called Seattle. Jesus Christ, Jacob, where have you been? Marcus's voice crackled through the phone, sharp with stress and barely controlled anger. The Singapore deal collapsed completely. Chen Industries pulled out after we missed 3 consecutive conference calls, and they're threatening to go with Morrison Tech instead. Jacob rubbed his eyes, trying to shift his mind from the warm intimacy of Saoirse's living room to the cold realities of international business. What's the total exposure? $47 million in lost revenue, plus another $20 in development costs we can't recover. But that's not the worst part. The board called an emergency meeting for Monday morning. There are rumors about a vote of no confidence. The words hit Jacob like cold water. In 15 years of running Alexander Industries, He'd never faced serious challenges to his leadership. The company's consistent growth and profitability had insulated him from the kind of internal politics that destroyed other executives. On what grounds? Abandonment of fiduciary duty. Dereliction of executive responsibilities. The Singapore deal was your baby, Jacob. You personally negotiated the initial terms, promised Chen you'd be directly involved in implementation. When you vanished without explanation, they took it as a sign of disrespect and instability. Jacob walked to his hotel window, looking out at the parking lot where normal people were starting their Saturday routines. Families loading kids into minivans for soccer games. Elderly couples walking small dogs. A young woman in scrubs heading to work at the hospital. Real life happening at human speed, unconcerned with quarterly profits and shareholder expectations. I can fix this. How? Chen won't take your calls, the board thinks you've lost your mind, and Morrison Tech is already flying executives to Singapore to close the deal. Plus, there's another problem. Jacob waited, sensing that Marcus had saved the worst news for last. Someone leaked information about your location to the financial press. There's going to be a story in Monday's Wall Street Journal about Alexander Industries' CEO, pursuing personal interests while major deals collapse. The headline mentions you being spotted at a diner in Central California. The invasion of privacy didn't surprise Jacob, but the timing felt like a deliberate sabotage attempt. Who leaked it? We're investigating, but it doesn't matter now. The damage is done. You need to get back here immediately and start damage control. Jacob closed his eyes, feeling the familiar weight of corporate crisis settle on his shoulders like a well-worn jacket. This was the world he knew how to navigate, where problems had solutions and challenges yielded to sufficient application of intelligence and resources. But returning to Seattle meant leaving Saoirse just as they'd begun to rebuild their connection. It meant choosing his company over her once again, proving that nothing had really changed despite his promises of transformation. I'll be on the first flight out. Thank God. I've got meetings scheduled starting Sunday afternoon to prep for the board presentation. We can salvage this if we move fast and you show them the old Jacob is back. The old Jacob. The phrase echoed in his mind as he ended the call and began packing his bags. Was that who he really was underneath the romantic fantasies of the past few days? A man so fundamentally defined by corporate success that personal happiness would always come second? Jacob's hands moved automatically through the familiar routine of efficient travel preparation, but his thoughts remained fixed on Saoirse's face the night before when she'd asked if he could really prioritize their relationship over business demands. He'd given her honest uncertainty then. Now reality was providing a definitive answer. His phone buzzed with a text from Saoirse. Good morning. Mom's having a good day, and Kelsey's making pancakes for breakfast. Want to join us before she heads to work? The simple invitation to ordinary family intimacy felt like a knife twisting in his chest. Jacob stared at the message for a long moment, then typed a response that felt like betrayal even as he sent it. Crisis at work. Need to fly back to Seattle immediately. Can I call you later? Her reply came quickly. Of course. Handle what you need to handle. No accusations, no dramatic protests, just the kind of gracious understanding that came from years of accommodating other people's emergencies. The response somehow made Jacob feel worse than anger would have. By 8 a.m., he was driving his rental car toward Fresno Yosemite International Airport, the Central Valley landscape blurring past his windows like a dream he was already forgetting. His phone rang constantly with updates from Seattle, each call pulling him further back into the world of hostile takeovers and damaged relationships. But at a red light in Fresno, Jacob impulsively turned around and drove back toward Bakersfield. He couldn't leave without seeing Saoirse in person, without attempting to explain that this crisis didn't mean he was choosing business over her again. He arrived at the hometown kitchen just as the Saturday lunch rush was beginning. Through the windows, he could see Saoirse moving between tables with practiced efficiency, her smile warm as she chatted with regular customers who clearly considered her a friend rather than just service staff. Jacob entered the restaurant and took a corner booth, waiting for Saoirse to notice him. When she did, her expression cycled through surprise, concern, and something that looked like resignation. She approached his table during a brief lull in orders, her professional smile firmly in place but her eyes guarded. "I thought you were heading to the airport." "I am. But I needed to see you first, to explain what's happening." Saoirse glanced around the busy restaurant, calculating how much time she could spare for a personal conversation during peak hours. "I've got about 5 minutes before the kitchen starts backing up." Jacob quickly outlined the Singapore crisis, the board meeting, the media attention threatening his company's stability. He watched Saoirse's expression grow more distant with each detail, the same protective mask sliding back into place that he'd worked so hard to penetrate. "It sounds serious. You should go." "It is serious, but not more important than what we started building here." "Jacob." Saoirse's voice was gentle but firm, the tone she probably used with difficult customers who needed to be managed rather than confronted. "You don't have to explain yourself to me. I understand that your business needs your attention." "Do you?" "Because your face is telling me something different." She was quiet for a moment, her professional composure cracking slightly to reveal the hurt underneath. "My face is telling you that I've been here before. That I know what it looks like when someone has to choose between their career and their personal life. This isn't a choice. It's a temporary crisis that I need to handle. And when you handle this crisis, there will be another one. And another one after that. Because that's what happens when you build your entire identity around being indispensable." Jacob felt frustration rising in his chest, the same impatience that had served him well in boardrooms but was completely inappropriate in this context. "So I'm supposed to let my company collapse to prove my commitment to you?" "I never said that." Saoirse's voice remained calm, but Jacob caught the flash of pain in her eyes. "I said you should handle what you need to handle." The careful neutrality of her response was more damaging than anger would have been. Saoirse was protecting herself by offering no resistance to his departure, no emotional leverage he could use to justify staying. "I'll be back as soon as I can resolve this." "Of course you will." The words were technically supportive, but Jacob heard the subtext clearly. She didn't believe him. More accurately, she didn't believe that he believed himself. Saoirse was called away to handle a large order at table 6, leaving Jacob sitting alone in a restaurant full of people who seemed to belong in ways he never would. He watched her work, noting how she remembered every customer's preferences, how she managed multiple conversations while keeping track of complex orders, how she made everyone feel welcome in a space that felt more like a community center than a commercial establishment. This was her world, built on relationships and daily presence rather than quarterly profits and strategic planning. Jacob had thought he could bridge the gap between their different realities, but the morning's crisis had exposed the fundamental incompatibility of their lifestyles. When Saoirse returned to his table, Jacob had made his decision. "I have to go. The flight leaves in 2 hours." "I know. This doesn't change anything between us. I meant everything I said yesterday." Saoirse's smile was sad and knowing, the expression of someone who'd heard similar promises before. "You meant it when you said it. Just like you meant it 25 years ago when you promised to write every day and visit every weekend." The comparison stung because it was accurate. Jacob had been completely sincere in his teenage promises, just as he was sincere now in his belief that he could balance corporate demands with personal commitment. But sincerity hadn't prevented him from gradually prioritizing convenience over love when real-world pressures mounted. "I'm not 18 anymore, Saoirse. I understand what I'm choosing now." "Do you?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're choosing exactly what you chose before. The difference is that you're older and more polite about it." Jacob wanted to argue, to prove that this situation was genuinely different from their teenage separation. But the evidence was damning. Faced with competing demands, he was once again prioritizing his career over their relationship. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I've spent 25 years building a life where everything revolves around business success. I can't just flip a switch and become a different person overnight." I'm not asking you to become a different person. I'm asking you to choose what matters most when those choices conflict. And you've already decided I can't make the right choice. Saoirse was quiet for a long moment, her expression cycling through pain, disappointment, and finally a kind of weary acceptance. I've decided that I can't survive another round of waiting to find out whether I matter enough to prioritize. I did that once, and it nearly destroyed me. The finality in her voice hit Jacob like a physical blow. This wasn't anger that could be negotiated through or misunderstanding that could be clarified. This was the sound of a door closing on possibility. So that's it? One crisis and you write off everything we talked about building together. One crisis that reveals who you really are when the pressure's on. The same person who was going to call every day and visit every weekend until Stanford got demanding, and I became an inconvenience to manage rather than a priority to protect. Jacob felt something cracking inside his chest, the same helpless frustration he'd experienced 25 years ago when competing demands had forced impossible choices. But now he was older and supposedly wiser, with resources that should have made everything easier. I have to handle this, Saoirse. My employees are depending on me. My investors trust me to protect their assets. I can't just abandon my responsibilities. I'm not asking you to abandon anything. I'm asking you to find a way to honor your commitments without sacrificing our relationship. But you can't see any option except choosing one or the other. Because sometimes that's the only choice available. No, Jacob. Sometimes that's the only choice you're willing to consider. The accusation hung between them like a physical barrier, separating their different worldviews more completely than the years or miles ever had. Jacob saw a woman who didn't understand the complexities of corporate leadership. Saoirse saw a man who used those complexities to avoid making difficult personal commitments. Saoirse's manager approached their table, clearly uncomfortable about interrupting but forced to buy the growing line of customers waiting to be seated. I'm sorry, Saoirse, but we need table 12, and the kitchen's backing up orders. Of course. I'll be right there. She turned back to Jacob with the professional smile that had become her emotional armor. You should go catch your flight. I hope you can resolve everything in Seattle. Jacob stood up, reaching for his wallet to leave money he knew she wouldn't accept. This conversation isn't over. Yes, it is. Saoirse's voice was gentle but absolute. Have a safe flight. She walked away to greet the family waiting for table 12, her warm restaurant persona sliding back into place so seamlessly that Jacob might have imagined the intimate conversation they just shared. But he could see the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her hands as she poured water and distributed menus. Jacob left the restaurant feeling like he was abandoning a sinking ship, but he couldn't see any alternative that wouldn't result in his own professional destruction. The drive to Fresno passed in a haze of self-recrimination and frustrated logic, his mind cycling between justifications for his choice and recognition of its devastating consequences. At the airport, while waiting for his flight to board, Jacob called Kelsey's number. Mr. Alexander? Is everything okay? No, it's not. I had to fly back to Seattle for a business emergency, and your mother thinks I'm choosing my career over her again. Are you? The direct question forced Jacob to confront the truth he'd been avoiding. I don't know. I can't see any other option, but maybe that's because I'm not looking hard enough for alternatives. What kind of emergency? Jacob found himself explaining the Singapore crisis to a 21-year-old veterinary student, outlining the financial implications and political ramifications with the same detail he'd provide to his board of directors. Kelsey listened without interruption, then asked a question that stopped him cold. Is there any reason you have to handle this crisis in person? Can't you manage it remotely while staying here to work on your relationship with Mom? It's not that simple. The board needs to see me demonstrate commitment to the company, and the Singapore clients expect face-to-face meetings to rebuild trust. So you're choosing to meet their expectations rather than Mom's. I'm choosing to save my company from collapse. Your company or your ego? The question hit Jacob like a slap, forcing him to examine motivations he'd preferred to keep buried. Was this really about fiduciary duty, or was it about his inability to tolerate failure and criticism? Both, probably. At least you're honest. But Mr. Alexander, can I tell you something my mom taught me about ego versus real strength? Jacob's flight was being called for boarding, but he found himself desperate to hear what this remarkable young woman had to say. Real strength is doing what's right even when it's uncomfortable or makes you look weak to other people. Ego strength is doing what protects your image even when it hurts the people you claim to love. And you think I'm choosing ego strength? I think you're choosing the option that feels familiar instead of the one that requires you to become a different kind of person. Jacob watched other passengers boarding his flight, successful-looking people in expensive clothes who probably faced similar conflicts between personal desires and professional demands. None of them appeared to be struggling with a choice. They'd simply made it and moved forward with comfortable certainty. I don't know how to be a different kind of person. You learn by making different choices. One decision at a time, one day at a time, until the new way of being becomes more natural than the old way. What if I try to change and fail? What if I lose my company and discover I'm not capable of building the kind of relationship your mother deserves? Then at least you'll have tried something difficult instead of defaulting to something easy. Jacob closed his eyes, feeling the weight of decades' worth of choices that had prioritized safety over growth, control over vulnerability. Every major decision in his adult life had been calculated to minimize risk and maximize predictable outcomes. The idea of choosing uncertainty over security felt like stepping off a cliff. Your mother deserves better than my confusion. My mother deserves someone who cares enough about her to be confused. Someone who struggles with doing the right thing instead of someone who always chooses the convenient thing. The final boarding call echoed through the terminal, and Jacob realized he was about to miss his flight. In 15 minutes, he could be on his way back to Seattle, where problems had solutions and success could be measured in quarterly reports. Or he could walk away from everything he'd spent 25 years building and trust that love was a strong enough foundation for reimagining his entire life. I have to make a choice right now. Yes, you do. And whatever you choose will tell Mom everything she needs to know about whether you've really changed. Jacob looked at the gate where the last few passengers were scanning their boarding passes, then at his phone displaying Saoirse's number. 2 different futures stretched ahead of him, each requiring a different version of himself to navigate successfully. He thought about Margaret McMahon's proud description of her daughter's strength, about Kelsey's fierce protection of the family that had sustained her through every challenge, about Saoirse's steady grace in building a meaningful life without the advantages he'd taken for granted. Then he thought about the Singapore deal, the board meeting, the Wall Street Journal article that would question his competence and commitment. Professional humiliation versus personal possibility. The familiar path versus the unknown territory of putting love first. Jacob made his choice. He walked to the gate agent and explained that he wouldn't be boarding the flight, accepting the financial penalty and rebooking complications with surprising calm. Then he called Marcus. Thank God you're in the air. I've got the Seattle team assembled for damage control meetings as soon as you land. I'm not in the air. I'm not coming back to Seattle. The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds before Marcus found his voice. What do you mean you're not coming back? I mean I'm handling this crisis remotely. Set up video conferences with the board, arrange digital meetings with potential Singapore replacements, hire a crisis management firm to handle media relations. Do whatever needs to be done, but do it without expecting me to abandon my personal life for professional convenience. Jacob, you're not thinking clearly. This is career suicide. Maybe. Or maybe it's the first intelligent decision I've made in 25 years. Jacob hung up before Marcus could argue further, then walked out of the terminal into the Central Valley sunshine. He had no idea whether his company would survive his absence, whether the board would remove him from leadership, whether he'd destroyed everything he'd worked to build. But for the first time since returning to Bakersfield, Jacob felt like he was moving toward something instead of running away from it. The drive back to Bakersfield took an hour, giving him time to consider what he would say to Saoirse when he walked back into the restaurant. He couldn't promise that choosing her over his career would solve all their problems or guarantee a successful relationship. He could only promise that he was finally willing to find out what happened when love came first. The hometown kitchen's lunch rush was winding down when Jacob walked through the door for the second time that day. Saoirse looked up from wiping down tables, her expression cycling through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been hope. He approached her slowly, aware that every customer in the restaurant was probably watching this unexpected drama unfold in their familiar neighborhood gathering place. "I thought you had a flight to catch." "I did. I chose not to catch it." Saoirse set down her cleaning supplies, giving Jacob her full attention for the first time since the morning's painful conversation. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm learning to make different choices. One decision at a time, one day at a time, until putting you first becomes more natural than protecting my ego." Recognition flickered in her eyes as she realized he was quoting her daughter's advice. "You talk to Kelsey. She reminded me that real strength means doing what's right even when it's uncomfortable. And abandoning you again would be comfortable for me professionally, but completely wrong in every way that matters." Saoirse was quiet for a long moment, studying his face as if trying to determine whether this transformation was genuine or another romantic gesture that would crumble under real-world pressure. "What about your company? The crisis that couldn't wait will be handled by the competent people I hired to handle crises. If the board decides I'm unfit for leadership because I won't sacrifice my personal life for their comfort, then maybe I was never the right person for the job." "And if you lose everything you've worked for?" Jacob stepped closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in her brown eyes that had mesmerized him 25 years ago. "Then I'll find out whether I'm brave enough to build something new. Something that includes you from the foundation up instead of trying to squeeze you into the margins of a life designed around other priorities." "That's terrifying. Terrifying for both of us. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." Saoirse's professional composure finally cracked, revealing the vulnerable woman who'd been hiding underneath the careful control. Tears gathered in her eyes as she realized that this time, finally, someone was choosing her when the choice became difficult. "Are you sure? Because I can't do this halfway, Jacob. I can't be your weekend hobby or your midlife crisis adventure. If we try this, it has to be real and permanent and completely committed." "I'm sure." Terrified, but sure. She reached for his hands, and Jacob felt the same electric connection that had defined their teenage romance, now deepened by adult understanding of how rare and precious such connections truly were. "Then let's be terrified together and see what happens." Around them, the restaurant had gone completely quiet as regular customers witnessed what was clearly a significant moment in their favorite waitress's life. Someone started clapping, and soon the entire dining room erupted in applause for a love story 25 years in the making. Jacob pulled Saoirse into his arms, kissing her in front of God and the good people of Bakersfield, California, finally choosing love over everything else that had once seemed more important. But even as he held her close, Jacob's phone buzzed insistently with calls from Seattle, reminding him that choosing love was only the beginning of the challenge ahead. The phone wouldn't stop ringing. Jacob sat in his hotel room at the Hampton Inn on Rosedale Highway, watching the screen light up with calls from Seattle every 30 seconds. Marcus. Board members. Department heads. Financial reporters who'd somehow gotten his direct number. Each ignored call felt like another bridge burning behind him. At 11 p.m., he finally answered. "Jacob, thank Christ." Marcus's voice was ragged with exhaustion and barely controlled panic. "I've been trying to reach you for 6 hours. The Singapore situation has gone completely nuclear." "How nuclear?" Chen Industries issued a public statement calling Alexander Industries unreliable partners led by an absent CEO who prioritizes personal matters over professional obligations. The Wall Street Journal moved up their story to tomorrow's early edition. And Morrison Tech just announced they've secured the Singapore contract with terms 20% better than what we offered. Jacob felt the familiar knot of crisis management tighten in his stomach, but something had changed in his response to corporate disaster. The panic felt distant, like someone else's emergency he was observing from a safe distance. What about the board meeting? Moved to tomorrow at 9 a.m. Pacific. Emergency session. Patricia Hendricks called me directly and said they're prepared to invoke the CEO replacement clause if you don't appear with a convincing explanation for your absence. Patricia Hendricks was the lead independent director, a former Fortune 500 CEO who'd never shown Jacob anything but professional respect. If she was leading a charge against his leadership, the situation was more serious than he'd realized. Have you prepared damage control strategies? I've prepared 23 different scenarios, but they all require your presence and personal testimony. The board needs to see that you're committed to the company's future, not checking out mentally like the previous CEO before his breakdown. The reference to his predecessor stung. Robert Chen had built Alexander Industries into a billion-dollar enterprise before personal problems destroyed his judgment and nearly bankrupted the company. Jacob had spent 5 years rebuilding stakeholder confidence after that disaster. Now he was facing similar accusations of prioritizing personal interests over fiduciary responsibility. Marcus, I need you to listen carefully. I'm not coming back to Seattle tomorrow. The silence on the other end stretched so long that Jacob wondered if the call had dropped. You're not coming back. I'm not abandoning the company, but I'm not playing the game where every crisis requires my physical presence to prove my commitment. We're going to handle this remotely. Jacob, you're not thinking rationally. This isn't some minor public relations issue we can manage from a distance. The board is questioning your mental stability. The financial press is writing articles about your leadership competence. Our stock price dropped 12% in after-hours trading. This is an existential threat to everything we've built. Then we'll build something different. What the hell does that mean? Jacob walked to his hotel window, looking out at the parking lot where a young couple was loading suitcases into a pickup truck, probably heading out for a weekend camping trip that would cost them less than his hotel room but might create memories they'd treasure forever. It means I've spent 15 years proving my worth by being available 24 hours a day for every crisis, real or imagined. And what has that gotten me? A company that can't function without my constant presence, and a personal life so empty that I haven't had a meaningful relationship since I was 18. It's gotten you a net worth of $3 billion and control of one of the most successful private companies in the Pacific Northwest. And no one who cares whether I live or die except my employees and shareholders. Jacob, you're having some kind of midlife crisis breakdown. This is exactly what happened to Robert Chen right before he started making decisions that destroyed everything. The comparison hit Jacob like a physical blow because it contained enough truth to be devastating. He was behaving erratically by corporate standards, prioritizing personal desires over business logic, making emotional choices that threatened rational systems. But Robert Chen's breakdown had been about escaping responsibility and avoiding consequences. Jacob was trying to expand his definition of responsibility to include personal relationships and emotional health. Robert ran away from his problems. I'm running towards something better. You're running toward a waitress in a diner instead of facing a board of directors who control your company's future. The dismissive tone in Marcus's voice triggered something protective and fierce in Jacob's chest. Her name is Saoirse, and she's more intelligent and accomplished than half our board members. She raised a daughter who's going to be a veterinarian while working 3 jobs and caring for elderly parents. She turned a failing restaurant into the social center of her community. She survived 25 years of challenges that would have broken most people, and she did it with more grace and dignity than any executive I've ever worked with. Fine, she's wonderful. But she's not worth destroying your career over. Maybe my career isn't worth preserving if it requires me to treat the people I love as expendable. Jesus, Jacob, listen to yourself. You sound like a romantic comedy character, not a business leader. Love doesn't pay salaries or generate quarterly returns or protect pension funds. Responsibility does. The accusation stung because Jacob had always prided himself on understanding the weight of other people's financial security. Alexander Industries employed over 800 people whose mortgages and children's college funds depended on the company's continued success. His decisions affected their lives in concrete, measurable ways. I'm not abandoning responsibility. I'm trying to figure out how to be responsible to more than just shareholders and employees. By missing the most important board meeting in the company's history? By proving that the company can survive without my physical presence for every crisis. If we've built something that collapses because I'm not in a conference room for one meeting, then we've built something fundamentally unstable. Marcus was quiet for a moment, and Jacob could hear him typing rapidly, probably pulling up financial reports or crisis management protocols. The board won't see it that way. They'll see a CEO who abandoned ship when things got difficult. Then maybe they need a different CEO. You don't mean that. But Jacob was surprised to discover that he did mean it, at least partially. The idea of losing Alexander Industries terrified him, but not as much as the idea of losing Saoirse again. Somewhere in the past 3 days, his priorities had shifted in ways that made corporate success feel less essential to his identity. What would happen if I resigned? Are you insane? You'd lose everything. Your salary, your equity stake, your severance package. The non-compete clause would prevent you from starting a similar company for 3 years. You'd go from billionaire to unemployed overnight. But the company would survive? Probably. The board would name an interim CEO, most likely promote someone from senior management. The Singapore crisis would be contained as evidence that leadership changes were necessary. Stock price would recover within 6 months. Jacob felt something loosening in his chest as he considered the possibility of walking away from everything he'd built. The fear was still there, but it was mixed with something that felt like relief. And our employees would keep their jobs? Almost certainly. The company's fundamentals are solid, and the crisis is about leadership perception, not operational problems. So if I resigned, the people depending on Alexander Industries would be protected, and I'd be free to build a different kind of life. A different kind of life making what? 40,000 a year managing some small-town restaurant? Jacob, you're talking about giving up everything that makes you who you are. Maybe who I am isn't working anymore. This is the waitress talking. She's gotten into your head with romantic fantasies about simple living and small-town values, but reality doesn't work that way. You are not a small-town person. You've never been happy with ordinary pleasures or modest ambitions. You need challenge and complexity and the kind of high-stakes success that makes most people buckle under pressure. The analysis was accurate enough to give Jacob pause. He had always been driven by ambition and the need to prove himself in arenas where failure carried serious consequences. Simple pleasures had never satisfied him for long. But maybe that restlessness had been about searching for something meaningful rather than something bigger. Maybe he'd been looking for connection and purpose in all the wrong places. What if I've been wrong about what makes me happy? Then you'll find out the hard way, after you've destroyed everything you've spent your adult life creating. Jacob sat down on the hotel bed, feeling the weight of competing futures pressing down on his shoulders. Every instinct developed over 25 years of business leadership was screaming at him to get on the next plane to Seattle and salvage his career before the damage became irreversible. But underneath the panic was a quieter voice reminding him how it had felt to hold Saoirse in his arms that afternoon. To be chosen by someone who saw his flaws clearly and loved him anyway. To feel like himself instead of like the CEO character he'd been performing for so long. Marcus, I need you to do something for me. Anything. I need you to research the legal requirements for CEO resignation and company transition. Find out what happens to my equity, what kind of severance I'm entitled to, how quickly leadership change can be implemented. Jacob, please don't do this. Sleep on it at least. Make the decision when you're thinking clearly instead of running on adrenaline and infatuation. I am thinking clearly. For the first time in years, I'm thinking about what actually matters instead of what I'm supposed to want. What about your employees? What about the people who've built their careers on your leadership? You have obligations beyond your personal happiness. The guilt tactic hit its mark because Jacob did feel responsible for the careers and financial security of people who'd trusted their futures to his company. Walking away from Alexander Industries would affect hundreds of families in ways that felt selfish and reckless. Would my resignation actually hurt them, or would it just hurt your career advancement? That's unfair. Is it? You've spent 5 years positioning yourself as my successor. If I stay and fight this crisis, you remain second in command indefinitely. If I resign, you become interim CEO with a clear path to permanent leadership. You think I'm sabotaging you? I think you're giving me advice that serves your interests more than mine. The accusation hung between them like a challenge, forcing both men to examine motivations they'd preferred to keep buried. Fine. You want brutal honesty? Yes, I think you're making a massive mistake that will destroy your life and probably wreck the company in the short term. But yes, if you resign, I'll probably end up as CEO within 6 months. I've worked my entire career for that opportunity, and I think I'd be good at it. Then why are you trying to convince me not to resign? Because I respect you, and I don't want to watch you throw away everything you've accomplished for a fantasy that won't survive contact with reality. The sincerity in Marcus's voice cut through Jacob's cynicism, reminding him that their professional relationship had developed into something approaching friendship over the years. Marcus wasn't just protecting his own interests. He was trying to save Jacob from what looked like self-destructive impulsiveness. What if it's not a fantasy? What if I've been living the fantasy, and this is the first real thing I've experienced since I was 18? Then you'll know in 6 months, after the romantic excitement wears off and you're dealing with the day-to-day reality of building a relationship with someone whose life experiences are completely different from yours. And if I'm wrong, I'll have lost everything I worked for. If you're wrong, you'll have learned something important about yourself. If you're right, you'll have gained something more valuable than money or corporate titles. Jacob was surprised by Marcus's shift toward supporting his choice, even reluctantly. So what do you think I should do? I think you should do what you can live with 20 years from now. If you stay and fight for the company but lose Saoirse again, will you regret it? If you resign and build a life with her but lose your career, will you regret it? The question forced Jacob to imagine 2 different versions of his future self, each living with different consequences and different forms of success or failure. In one scenario, he was 65 and still CEO of Alexander Industries, having weathered the Singapore crisis and countless others, with a net worth approaching $5 billion and a reputation as one of the most successful executives of his generation. But he was alone in his penthouse office, surrounded by achievements that no longer felt meaningful. In the other scenario, he was 65 and living in Bakersfield, having built a smaller but more sustainable business alongside Saoirse, with grandchildren who knew his name and a community that considered him family. His net worth was a fraction of what it could have been, but his life was rich with relationships and daily meaning. Both futures contained risks and rewards, but only one felt like it belonged to the person he was becoming instead of the person he'd been performing. I'm going to resign. Are you sure? I'm terrified, but yes. I'm sure. What do you want me to tell the board? Jacob thought about the 8 men and women who'd trusted him with leadership of their investment, who'd supported his vision and strategic decisions through 15 years of growth and occasional setbacks. They deserved an explanation that honored their confidence without betraying his new priorities. Tell them that I've realized I'm not the right person to lead the company through the next phase of growth. That I recommend you as interim CEO with full authority to manage the Singapore crisis and position Alexander Industries for long-term success under different leadership. That's it? No dramatic speeches about following your heart or choosing love over money. They don't need to understand my personal motivations. They need to understand that the company will be better served by leadership that's fully committed to corporate growth without competing personal priorities. Jacob, are you absolutely certain about this? Because once you submit your resignation, there's no coming back. The board won't forgive this kind of instability, and the financial press will crucify you as another executive who cracked under pressure. I'm certain. Draft the resignation letter tonight and submit it first thing tomorrow morning. I'll hold a press conference from here explaining that I'm stepping down to pursue other interests. What other interests? You don't have any other interests. I will. I'm going to figure out how to be useful to a community instead of just profitable to shareholders. Jacob could hear Marcus typing again, probably making notes about succession planning and crisis communications. What about Saoirse? Have you told her about this decision? Not yet. I want to make sure it's final before I involve her in the consequences. Smart. Because if this doesn't work out, you'll need her to understand that you gave up everything for her, and she'll need to live with that responsibility. The warning was meant to be protective, but it highlighted something Jacob hadn't fully considered: the pressure his sacrifice would place on their relationship. If he resigned from Alexander Industries and their romance failed, Saoirse would carry the burden of knowing her rejection had cost him his career. That's manipulative. It's realistic. Grand gestures create emotional debt that's difficult to repay. If you quit your job for her, she'll feel obligated to make the relationship work even if problems develop. So what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you find a way to choose her without making her responsible for the choice. Resign because it's what you want for your own life, not because it's what she needs from you. The distinction was subtle but important. Jacob needed to be certain that his decision was about personal transformation rather than romantic manipulation, about becoming a different kind of person rather than proving his devotion through sacrifice. You're right. This has to be about what I want, not about what I think she wants. And what do you want? Jacob looked around the generic hotel room with its corporate furniture and motivational artwork, thinking about all the similar rooms he'd occupied during 15 years of business travel. Comfortable, efficient, utterly forgettable spaces designed for people passing through rather than settling down. I want to live somewhere that feels like home. I want to wake up next to someone who knows me as more than my job title. I want to build something that makes people's lives better in ways I can see and measure personally. Those are good wants. They're also completely different from anything you've wanted for the past 25 years. Maybe that's the point. Maybe I've been wanting the wrong things. Or maybe you've been wanting the right things for the wrong reasons. Success and achievement aren't inherently bad, Jacob. The question is whether you're pursuing them for external validation or personal fulfillment. The insight forced Jacob to examine his motivations more carefully. Had he built Alexander Industries because he enjoyed the challenge and complexity of business leadership, or because success provided proof of worth he couldn't generate internally? Both, probably. But the external validation part has stopped working. I could double the company's revenue tomorrow, and it wouldn't make me feel like I was living a meaningful life. Then you're making the right choice, even if it's the terrifying choice. Jacob felt something settling into place in his chest, a calm certainty that surprised him with its strength. This wasn't impulsive romanticism or midlife crisis desperation. This was the deliberate choice to prioritize emotional health over financial security, relationships over achievements, presence over productivity. Thank you for listening, Marcus, and for being honest about your own interests. Thank you for creating opportunities one never could have imagined. I hope this works out the way you're dreaming it will. And I hope you're a better CEO than I was. I hope so too. The company deserves leadership that isn't conflicted about being there. After ending the call, Jacob sat in silence for nearly an hour, letting the magnitude of his decision settle into his consciousness. By tomorrow evening, he would no longer be CEO of Alexander Industries. His business cards would be worthless, his corporate email disabled, his office reassigned to someone else. But he would be free to build a life based on love rather than achievement, connection rather than competition, service rather than profit maximization. The fear was still there, sharp and persistent, but it was overwhelmed by something that felt like relief. For the first time since returning to Bakersfield, Jacob felt like he was moving toward his authentic self instead of away from it. At midnight, he walked out of the hotel and drove to Saoirse's house. The porch light was on, and he could see her silhouette in the living room window, probably reading or watching late-night television. Jacob sat in his rental car for several minutes, gathering courage for the conversation that would determine whether his sacrifice was meaningful or catastrophic. Then he walked to the door and knocked softly. Saoirse opened it wearing pajama pants and an oversized sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders in a way that made her look younger and more vulnerable. "Jacob, what are you doing here so late? I need to tell you something important. About my choice." She stepped aside to let him enter, leading him to the couch where they'd shared so much honest conversation over the past few days. "What choice?" "I'm resigning from Alexander Industries tomorrow morning." Saoirse stared at him for a long moment, her expression cycling through surprise, concern, and something that looked like fear. "Because of me. Because of me. Because I realized that no amount of corporate success is worth living a life that doesn't include the people I love." "Jacob, you can't quit your job for me. That's too much pressure, too much responsibility. What if we don't work out? What if I'm not worth the sacrifice? You're worth it. But more importantly, I'm worth it. I'm worth living a life that makes me happy instead of just successful." Saoirse reached for his hands, her expression serious and slightly scared. "Are you sure this is what you want? Not what you think I want, but what will actually make you fulfilled and content?" "I'm sure. Terrified, but sure." "What will you do for work? How will you support yourself?" "I'll figure it out. Maybe I'll help you expand the restaurant, or start a consulting business for small companies, or teach business classes at the community college. I have enough savings to take time figuring out what comes next." "And if you regret it? If you miss the challenge and excitement of running a billion-dollar company? Then I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. But I'd rather risk regretting a choice I made for love than spend the rest of my life regretting the choice I made for money." Saoirse was quiet for a long time, studying his face as if trying to read his future in his present expression. "This is really happening. This is really happening. If you want it to happen, I want it to happen. God help me, I want it more than I've wanted anything in 25 years. But Jacob, you have to promise me something. Anything. Promise me that if this doesn't work out, if we discover we're too different or want incompatible things, you won't blame me for your choice. Promise me you'll own the decision completely, regardless of the consequences." "I promise. This is my choice about my life, not a sacrifice I'm making for you. And promise me you won't resent me if you miss your old life. If you wake up 6 months from now wishing you were back in Seattle closing billion-dollar deals. I promise. Though I reserve the right to ask you to remind me of this conversation if I get temporarily nostalgic for corporate drama." Saoirse laughed, and some of the tension left her shoulders. "I can handle that responsibility." Jacob pulled her closer, marveling at how right it felt to hold her in his arms, how completely her presence calmed the anxiety that had been his constant companion for years. "So we're really going to try this? Build a life together in Bakersfield, California. We're really going to try this. Though I should warn you, dating a former waitress is probably going to be a significant adjustment for a former billionaire CEO. Dating a former billionaire CEO is probably going to be a significant adjustment for a former waitress." They held each other in comfortable silence, both contemplating the enormous changes ahead and the possibility that love might actually be strong enough to overcome every practical obstacle. Outside, Bakersfield continued its quiet small-town rhythm, unaware that 2 lives had just committed to rewriting themselves completely. But in Saoirse's living room, Jacob felt like he was finally coming home to the person he'd always been meant to become. Tomorrow would bring resignation letters and press conferences and the practical challenges of dismantling one life while building another. But tonight, Jacob was exactly where he belonged, with the woman he'd never stopped loving, making the choice that would define the rest of their lives together. The phone calls from Seattle could wait. Love had waited 25 years. It was time to make it the priority it had always deserved to be. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Mel's diner as Jacob stood outside the glass doors, watching Saoirse prepare for the breakfast rush. She moved with practiced efficiency, setting up coffee stations and arranging fresh pies in the display case, unaware that her life was about to change forever. Jacob's phone buzzed with another call from Seattle. This time it was Patricia Hendricks from the board of directors. He declined the call and turned off the phone entirely. Whatever storms were brewing in the corporate world would have to weather themselves. Today belonged to a different kind of future. The resignation letter sat in his email drafts, ready to send with a single click. But first, he needed to have one more conversation with the woman who'd inspired him to rewrite the entire trajectory of his life. The diner's bell chimed as he entered, drawing Saoirse's attention from the coffee machine. She looked up with a smile that faltered slightly when she saw his expression. "You look like a man who's about to change the world." "Just my world. And hopefully yours." She poured 2 cups of coffee and gestured toward their usual booth in the back corner. The morning regulars were beginning to filter in, but Mel had agreed to cover the early shift to give Saoirse time for what Jacob had described as an important conversation about the future. "I sent the resignation letter 20 minutes ago," Jacob said without preamble. "It's official. I'm no longer CEO of Alexander Industries." Saoirse's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. "How do you feel?" "Terrified. Relieved. Free. Like I just jumped off a cliff and I'm not sure if I'm flying or falling." "And the board? How did they react?" "I haven't given them a chance to react yet. I turned off my phone after sending the letter. They'll figure out how to move forward without me, and I'll figure out how to move forward without them." Saoirse reached across the table to take his hand. "What happens now?" Jacob took a deep breath, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether his leap of faith landed safely or crashed spectacularly. "Now I ask you to take a leap of faith with me." He pulled a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table between them. "I spent most of last night working with my financial team to set up something I hope you'll consider." "Jacob, if this is about money, it's about opportunity and justice, and making sure that what happened to us 25 years ago never happens to anyone else." He opened the folder to reveal legal documents and financial projections. "I'm establishing the Saoirse McMahon Educational Foundation with an initial endowment of $50 million. The foundation will provide full scholarships to academically gifted students from low-income families, with priority given to first-generation college applicants who demonstrate leadership potential." Saoirse stared at the documents as if they were written in a foreign language. "You want to name a foundation after me? I want you to run it. As the executive director, you'd oversee scholarship selection, work with partner universities to ensure student support goes beyond just tuition, and develop programs that help recipients succeed academically and professionally." "Jacob, I don't have experience running a foundation. I've never managed budgets that large or worked with universities or—" "You've managed 3 jobs simultaneously while raising a daughter and caring for elderly parents. You've turned a struggling diner into the heart of this community. You've mentored dozens of young people who've gone on to successful careers. The skills you need, you already have. The experience you lack, you can learn." Saoirse flipped through the documents, her expression cycling between amazement and overwhelming uncertainty. "This is incredible, but it's also huge. Life-changing huge. Are you sure you want to trust me with this kind of responsibility?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You understand what it means to have dreams deferred by circumstances beyond your control. You understand the difference between academic potential and practical opportunity. You understand how to help people without making them feel diminished by the help. Where would the foundation be based? Here. In Bakersfield. The foundation would lease the old Woolworth building downtown and renovate it into offices and a community resource center. Local high schools could use the space for college prep programs. Scholarship recipients could access tutoring and mentoring services, and community members could attend financial literacy and career development workshops. Saoirse looked up from the papers with tears in her eyes. You want to bring resources to this community instead of expecting people to leave to find opportunities. I want to prove that success doesn't require abandoning the places and people that shaped you. Some of our scholarship recipients will go to Harvard and Stanford and never come back, and that's wonderful. But others might choose to return and use their education to strengthen their home communities. Both paths should be equally supported and celebrated. And you'd be involved in the foundation too? If you'll have me, I'd like to serve as a board member and help with strategic planning and fundraising. I'd also like to develop partnerships with businesses that could provide internships and entry-level career opportunities for scholarship recipients. Saoirse was quiet for several minutes, reading through the foundation charter and organizational structure. Jacob watched her process the information, seeing the moment when overwhelming uncertainty shifted into excited possibility. This would really happen. Students like Romina is, would get full rides to college. Starting with 25 scholarships in the first year, growing to 100 annually within 5 years. Each scholarship covers tuition, room, board, books, and a modest living stipend. Recipients also get paired with professional mentors in their chosen fields and guaranteed summer internships. And the foundation would be mine to run? I'd make decisions about who gets selected and what support services to offer. You'd work with a board of advisors, but yes, the day-to-day operations would be your responsibility. You'd build the program based on your vision of what would have made the biggest difference in your own educational journey. Saoirse closed the folder and looked directly at Jacob, her expression serious and slightly scared. This isn't just about the foundation, is it? This is about us building a life together. The foundation is real regardless of what happens between us. The money is committed, the legal structure is established, and you're the designated director whether you're dating me or never want to see me again. But yes, I'm hoping we can build both the foundation and a relationship together. What would our life look like? Day to day, I mean. Where would we live? How would we handle the fact that you're used to private jets and I'm used to taking the bus? Jacob had spent considerable time thinking about the practical realities of bridging their different worlds. I'd like to buy a house here in Bakersfield, something comfortable but not ostentatious. I'd like to learn how to live in a community instead of above it. As for the lifestyle differences, I figure we'll navigate them together. I'll probably need to learn to appreciate simpler pleasures, and you might occasionally enjoy some of the privileges wealth can provide. Like what? Like taking vacations to places you've always wanted to see. Like having access to the best medical care for your mother. Like never worrying about money for basic necessities ever again. And you won't miss the excitement of running a billion-dollar company? You won't get bored managing educational programs and living in a small Central Valley town. The question went to the heart of Jacob's deepest fear about his decision. Would the man who'd thrived on high-stakes corporate battles find fulfillment in the quieter rhythms of community-based work? I might miss some aspects of corporate leadership, but I know I'll regret it forever if I don't take this chance to find out if love and community can be more fulfilling than money and power. And if it doesn't work out? If we discover we're too different or want incompatible things? Then we'll handle it like adults who care about each other. The foundation will continue, you'll have financial security and meaningful work, and we'll both be better for having tried. Saoirse stood up and walked to the diner's front window, looking out at the morning traffic on Chester Avenue. Jacob could see her weighing possibilities and consequences, imagining different versions of her future. Jacob, I need to tell you something about why I stayed in Bakersfield all these years. Okay. It wasn't just about taking care of my parents or raising Romina. It was about fear. Fear of failing in a bigger world. Fear of proving that maybe I wasn't as smart as everyone thought I was in high school. It was easier to stay here and be a big fish in a small pond than to risk discovering I was actually ordinary. The admission surprised Jacob with its honesty and vulnerability. "You're many things, Saoirse, but ordinary isn't one of them." "How can you be so sure? You've seen me for 3 days, and most of that time I've been serving you coffee and rehashing old memories. I've seen you manage difficult customers with patience and grace. I've seen you mentor teenage employees and help elderly regulars feel valued and heard. I've seen you navigate complex family dynamics while maintaining your own integrity and independence. I've seen you take a risk on loving someone who hurt you before, despite every rational reason to protect yourself. None of that is ordinary. But running a foundation, managing millions of dollars, working with university administrators and government officials, that's not the same as managing a diner staff and chatting with customers." "You're right. It's not the same. It's bigger and more complex and more impactful. But the core skills are identical. Understanding people, solving problems, building relationships, managing resources, creating systems that serve others effectively." Saoirse turned back toward him, her expression still uncertain but less fearful. "What if I'm not good at it? Then you'll learn. And if you make mistakes, you'll fix them. And if you discover it's not the right fit, you'll try something else. The foundation will pay you enough salary that you can afford to take risks and change directions if necessary." "How much salary?" $200,000 annually, plus health benefits and a retirement plan. Saoirse's eyes widened. "That's more than I've made in the past 5 years combined. It's appropriate compensation for the responsibility you'd be taking on. And it's enough to ensure you never have to worry about basic financial security again." "Jacob, this is overwhelming. Life-changing overwhelming. I need time to think about it." "Of course. Take all the time you need. The foundation documents don't require your signature immediately. But you need an answer about us. About whether I'm willing to build a relationship with a man who just gave up everything for a second chance." Jacob stood and moved to stand beside her at the window, close enough to touch but respecting her need for space to process. "I need an answer about us, but not today. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to rent an apartment here in town, start figuring out how to be a regular person instead of a CEO, and give you time to decide what you want without pressure. What if people find out about the foundation before I'm ready to make a public decision? What if the press shows up asking questions about the billionaire who quit his job for his high school sweetheart? They probably will. Business journalists are already calling the hotel, trying to understand why I resigned so suddenly. But that's my problem to handle, not yours. You don't owe anyone explanations about personal decisions that haven't been made yet." Saoirse leaned against his shoulder, allowing herself to accept comfort without committing to more than the moment required. "This is crazy, isn't it? 2 people in their 40s trying to recapture something that might have been more about nostalgia than real compatibility. Maybe. Or maybe it's the sanest thing either of us has ever done. Choosing love over fear, connection over security, presence over productivity. And if we crash and burn spectacularly, then we crash and burn spectacularly while trying to build something beautiful together. I'd rather fail at love than succeed at loneliness." The diner's bell chimed as the morning rush began in earnest. Saoirse straightened, her professional instincts kicking in as customers filled the booths and counter stools. "I should help Mel with the crowd. Go ahead. I'll sit at the counter and drink coffee like a regular customer." "Jacob." "Yeah. Thank you. For the foundation, for the risk you're taking, for giving me time to figure out what I want. No one's ever offered me anything close to this kind of opportunity or this kind of love. You deserve both. You've always deserved both." Jacob watched Saoirse slip back into her role as the diner's heart and soul, greeting regulars by name and making newcomers feel welcome with genuine warmth. The contrast between her natural leadership abilities and her self-doubt about running a foundation struck him as both heartbreaking and inspiring. His phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. Resignation accepted by board. I'm named interim CEO effective immediately. Press conference scheduled for 2 p.m. Pacific. Stock price up 3% on news of leadership stability. Good luck with your new life. Jacob deleted the message without responding. His old life was officially over, and his new life was waiting to be built one decision at a time. Over the next hour, he observed Saoirse managing the breakfast rush with the same skills that would serve her well as a foundation executive. Strategic thinking about workflow and resource allocation, emotional intelligence in handling personality conflicts, and an innate understanding of how to make people feel valued and supported. When the rush finally subsided, she approached his counter seat with a fresh cup of coffee and a piece of apple pie. On the house. Consider it a thank you for the most generous job offer in the history of Bakersfield. Have you made any decisions? I've made one decision. I want to try. The foundation, the relationship, the whole terrifying, wonderful possibility of building something together. I don't know if I'll be good at it, and I can't promise it will work out the way we're hoping, but I want to try. Jacob felt something uncoiling in his chest, a tension he'd carried for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to be without it. Are you sure? I'm sure I want to try. I'm sure I'd regret it forever if I let fear make this decision for me. I'm sure that you're the best man I've ever known, and if you think I can do this job, maybe I should trust your judgment more than my own insecurities. And us. The relationship part. I'm sure I never stopped loving you. I'm sure that what we have is rare and worth protecting. I'm sure I'd rather risk my heart than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. Jacob reached across the counter to take her hands, marveling again at how perfectly they fit together. So we're really doing this? Building a foundation and a life together in Bakersfield, California. We're really doing this. Though I should warn you, dating the executive director of a major educational foundation is probably going to be a significant adjustment for a former billionaire CEO. Dating a former billionaire CEO is probably going to be a significant adjustment for the executive director of a major educational foundation. They were interrupted by a commotion near the diner's entrance as a news crew from the local television station set up cameras outside. A reporter was already talking to several customers about Jacob's presence in town and the rumors of his resignation from Alexander Industries. Looks like our quiet conversation is about to become public, Saoirse observed. Are you ready for that? Are you ready to be known as the man who gave up billions for love? Only if you're ready to be known as the woman who was worth billions. Saoirse laughed, and Jacob realized that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together with the same combination of humor, courage, and stubborn hope that had sustained their teenage romance 25 years earlier. Should we give them a statement? We should give them a story worth telling. About second chances and choosing love over fear and the possibility that some dreams are worth waiting a lifetime to fulfill. Jacob stood and offered Saoirse his arm. Ready to change the world, Executive Director McMahon? Ready to change the world, Mr. Former CEO Alexander. They walked toward the diner's entrance together, past the news cameras and curious onlookers, into the bright California sunshine and the uncertain but hopeful future they'd chosen to build together. 3 months later, the Saoirse McMahon Educational Foundation announced its first class of scholarship recipients. 25 brilliant, determined students from across the Central Valley who would attend universities ranging from UC Berkeley to Princeton to Howard University. The foundation's headquarters in the renovated Woolworth building had become a gathering place for students, parents, and community members who shared a belief that education could transform individual lives and entire communities. Jacob had purchased a modest house on a tree-lined street 6 blocks from the foundation offices, close enough for Saoirse to walk to work when the weather was nice. Their relationship had weathered the inevitable adjustments of merging 2 very different life experiences, but their fundamental compatibility had proven stronger than any surface-level conflicts about money or lifestyle or future planning. The national press had eventually tired of the billionaire quits for love story, But the foundation's work had attracted attention from education advocates and philanthropic organizations across the country. Saoirse had proven to be a natural at fundraising and program development, expanding the foundation's reach beyond her own initial expectations. On a warm Friday evening in May, Jacob and Saoirse sat on their front porch swing, reviewing applications for the foundation's second round of scholarships. The stack of essays and transcripts represented hundreds of students who saw education as their path to a better life, just as Saoirse once had. "Any regrets?" she asked, as she had many times over the past months. "Only one," Jacob replied, as he always did. "What's that?" "I regret waiting 25 years to come home to you." Saoirse leaned against his shoulder, watching the evening light fade over the neighborhood they'd chosen to build their life in together. "It wasn't the wrong time before. We needed those 25 years to become the people who could make this work. Maybe. Or maybe some love is strong enough to overcome any obstacle, including our own youth and stupidity. Either way, we're here now. And we have work to do." Jacob looked at the scholarship applications in her lap, each one representing a young person whose life might be transformed by the opportunity they'd created together. "Yes, we do. We have beautiful work to do." As the stars appeared over Bakersfield, California, Jacob reflected on the unexpected turns that had brought him from a sterile Seattle penthouse to a front porch swing beside the woman he'd never stopped loving. The corporate empire he'd built was thriving under new leadership. The foundation they'd created was changing lives across the Central Valley, and the love they'd rediscovered was proving stronger than any force that had ever tried to separate them. Some stories end with dramatic gestures and passionate declarations. Others end with quiet contentment and the daily choice to build something meaningful together. Jacob and Saoirse's story ended with both: a love dramatic enough to inspire headlines and sacrifice, and steady enough to sustain the unglamorous work of creating lasting change in a community that had always deserved better opportunities than it received. 25 years after their first goodbye, they had finally learned that the best love stories aren't about finding someone perfect, but about choosing to love someone completely, flaws and dreams and fears and possibilities all included. And in a renovated building on Chester Avenue, 25 brilliant students were preparing to attend college on full scholarships. Proof that sometimes love's greatest victory isn't personal happiness, but the ability to transform that happiness into hope for others. The Billionaire CEO had found his way home to the waitress who'd never stopped believing in the power of dreams deferred but not abandoned. And together, they were making sure that the next generation would never have to choose between love and opportunity, between staying home and reaching higher, between the life they were born into and the life they dared to build. Love won, but more than that, love multiplied. Jacob and Saoirse didn't just get their happy ending. They created a legacy that would change thousands of lives for generations to come. Their story proves that the greatest victories aren't just personal, they're transformational for entire communities. What dreams have you deferred? What second chances are you still hoping for? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible tales of love, sacrifice, and the courage to choose hope over fear. Sometimes the best headlines aren't about what we achieve, but about what we choose to give away. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, wait until you see what's coming next. It's even more powerful and inspiring than you can imagine. So don't go anywhere. Click on that video showing on your screen right now to dive into another amazing story that will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you won't regret it.